Hello guys, welcome to Soul Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto inherited the 9 sovereign beasts' blood? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. Storm in the Spine. The forest above Konoha's north road wore a dusk the color of bruised plum. Shadows pooled under pine boughs and the air leaned toward rain. Naruto crouched on a ridgeline of wind-smoothed stone with the quiet impatience of a feral cat. He could taste a storm in the distance, metal at the back of the tongue, the hum before the sky makes decisions, and somehow the ridge itself felt like a rib under his palm. Like the mountain had a heartbeat tonight. 3 minutes, Kakashi said behind him, voice easy as a yawn. Convoy should crest the bend right there. If anything tags them, we intercept. If nothing tags them, we still intercept because I don't trust schedules. Naruto flashed a thumbs up over his shoulder. Sakura tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and scanned the slope. The road bene. Them cut a pale ribbon through the trees. Lamplight on poles clicked faintly as moths knocked into glass. Feels wrong, Naruto said. He didn't know how to say it without sounding like he was guessing. The wind along the ridge kept hesitating, stops and starts like a breath held too long. Kakashi's visible eye creased. Wrong how? The air, Naruto said. Like, it's trying not to be here. Sakura gave him a look. One tick from teasing and one from worry. Kakashi just nodded like Naruto had given him a weather report and tapped the little metal book into his vest. Good wrong, then, we'll keep it. Down the slope the convoy rounded the bend. 3 chunin in flak vests, 1 civilian cart with barrel-lashed goods and a pair of kids dozing against sacks. The kids' heads bumped together in sleep. The driver's jaw worked a chewing wad against his molars. One of the chunin rolled his shoulder against an ache he'd earned years ago on a mission he never told anyone about. All ordinary, all wrong, because the lamplight on the pole nearest them flickered and then stopped flickering, dead still like it realized it was being watched. Naruto's breath shortened. The ridge's skin tensed under his palm. Something in him, like a coil nestled along his spine, slid into new alignment. He didn't know whether it was fear or promise. It felt like a door waking up. The lamplight went out, not flickered, not dimmed, out, and the world took a step away from sound. Kakashi's hand cut down in a flat signal. Move. Naruto moved. He was down the slope before he remembered deciding to go, feet finding. Purchase on a path that wasn't there a moment ago. Air caught him like a friend's grip, lifted him a hair and slid him forward. He cleared a fallen tree, felt the hitch in the breeze, set his foot down on it and didn't sink. For a breath it was like stepping on a taut rope. The air separated cleanly around him, invisible and present. His body recognized it faster than his mind. He hit the road as He first masked figure stepped out of the nothing between trees and road. Clothes the shade of temple ash, no forehead protector, no clan insignia. He held a little bell in his left hand that drank the space around it. Even the wind made no whisper across its lip. The kids in the cart slept on, oblivious, their dreams apparently obeying the bell more than their ears. Naruto didn't think. He didn't bother with words. He closed the distance. The masked man flicked the bell up. No chime. The sound was the absence of one. Naruto's forward momentum stuttered like somebody had throttled the world with 2 fingers. His boots bit into dust with too much weight. He was moving, but the air wasn't moving with him. The bell pulled. That was the best he could describe it. Like someone had tied a string from his sternum to the bell and tugged the thread toward silence. What is? Sakura started, then cut herself off, eyes narrowing at the cart. She went for the kids, rotating her body so she'd hit the wagon with the least force. Kakashi was a smear of gray already, slipping behind the masked man, kunai angled for a tendon that would make the bell drop. The masked man turned without turning. His shoulders stayed set but his head eased a fraction, like he'd known where the angle would come from and decided not to respect it. Kakashi's kunai nicked cloth and nothing else. The bell drifted to the right on a lazy line. A moon in gravity's wrong map. The chunin on the flank lunged in. The masked man tilted the bell and the chunin's momentum guttered like a candle in a box. He didn't fall so much as slow down into the ground. Naruto shifted weight to his back foot. The pull on his chest grew sharper. Okay, so frontal wasn't lovely. He inhaled to shout a warning he didn't know how to word, and something inside him bristled. Not his chakra, not the way the Kyuubi sometimes snarled along his nerves like a storm behind doorframes. This was quieter, older. It slid into the spaces between his ribs, found the notch in his hip, and said, "Let me move." The ridge breath he'd felt earlier broke. Air shivered. Naruto's hand came up without a weapon. He spread his fingers like they were measuring a distance, and then he closed them a little as if gripping thread. The wind obeyed. It gathered under his foot like a step that didn't exist. Naruto moved into it, sideways and forward, gliding across dust without lifting a heel. The masked man's bell tilted to follow, and Naruto let himself drift along the same tilt, his shoulders aligning with the pull while his core rotated off it. It was like catching a river at a bad angle and letting it side past your hips while you redirected your knees to a better current. He slipped inside the bell's tug and felt the string on his chest go slack. The masked man blinked. Naruto smiled because he'd meant to do that. Obviously, this was totally his plan all along and not whatever his bones had just decided to audition for. He slashed a hand across the bell, not to hit it but to draw a thin, sharp pressure line in front of it. Air hissed. The bell's lip fuzzed with dust. For a heartbeat the silence faltered, like a swallowed cough, and the road's end. Formal sounds popped back into place in a stutter of clattered harness clasps and Sakura's muttered curses and one of the kids squeaking in its sleep. Kakashi's hand closed on the masked man's wrist. The kunai kissed the base of his thumb. The masked man let the bell fall. It didn't hit the ground. It hung there, as if the absence of sound could hold objects like water holds leaves. Naruto's intrusive smile fell off his face. He got ready for the bell to suck them all sideways. Down. Sakura barked. Her voice was wrong. Too loud, as if the pull had just sprung and sound rushed to fill vacuum. Naruto dropped instinctively. A shadow cut his peripheral vision. Another masked figure. Second bell. Of course there was a second. Naruto rolled. The first bell's pull jerked his guts again, but he had his knees under him and the air under his foot was there this time, ready when he asked it. He kicked off nothing. The masked man's hand swept through empty space where Naruto's head had been, and Naruto's counterpunch met cloth and ribs with a thud that felt like punching the side of a drum. The masked man absorbed it with too much grace. Kakashi's voice, easy again. Naruto, see the way the dust's falling. Naruto spared a glance. The dust from the cart's wheels drifted toward the bells, sure, but not evenly. There were thin columns where the air was untouched, narrow corridors where sound still slipped through. Okay, Naruto said, mostly to himself. Okay. He shifted left into one of the narrow columns. The string on his chest loosened further. His shoulder went light. He exhaled. D in the air caught his breath and set it neatly aside like a clerk smoothing parchment. The back of his neck prickled. The rush underneath his skin wasn't fear. It was recognition. He heard something else then. Not with his ears. Somewhere between his molars and his breath a hum threaded itself. A growl born in his bones under the sound of his own pulse. Not rage. Resonance. It wanted out. Naruto bared his teeth. He didn't roar. He didn't have to. He let the growl roll up his soft palate and flicker through his sinuses, and the air around his mouth colored fractionally, like heat above a kettle. The bell in the nearer masked man's hand stuttered. The silence wobbled as if a tremor ran through a still pond. The masked man's head ticked, surprised for the first time. Naruto's grin came back. Yeah, he said to no one. Testing the shape of what lived in his chest. Yeah, he pulled the growl a little higher, and there was a brief, hungry moment where the note wanted to leap and take something with it. His eyes flared heat. He shifted the note lower, steady, as if calming a big cat. The bell's grip slipped for a breath and Kakashi shoved the masked man into the wagon's wheel. The bell hit dirt, rolled, and the silence bled out of the road like ink in water. Sound came rushing back with a messy joy. The second masked man took a step to adjust. And Sakura was there, heel catching his ankle, palm slamming his elbow joint with surgical precision. The bell jounced from his hand. Naruto didn't let it settle. He reached with his left like he was seizing a coin from midair and falled. A sliver of wind under the bell to flip it skyward. It hung and spun, helpless and a little ridiculous. "You two have new toys," Sakura said through her teeth, eyes cutting to Naruto and then to the strange hum still hovering around his mouth, assessing, filing away. "Wouldn't call them toys," Naruto said. His chest still thrummed like a struck wire, but the note had a place now. "Call them later," Kakashi said, lazy again. Because the masked men were already backing toward trees. Now three more shapes leaned into existence between trunk and lamplight. Silent, ranging, each carried a DFF errant tool. One with a chain looped in prayer knots, one with a wedge of dull black iron, one with a fan that wasn't for wind. Not shinobi tools, temple things converted to weapons. Their masks were plain and without malice. That might have been worse. Sakura slid in front of the cart without thought. Kakashi stepped between the wedge and Naruto with a little sigh like someone whose nap had been interrupted. Naruto felt the air tighten again, but the bells were still on the ground and he could feel the wind's hair stand up along his forearms. The hum under his tongue coiled and waited. "I hate it when I'm right," Kakashi murmured. He didn't sound like he hated it. The one with the iron wedge moved first. He didn't run. He walked like he'd already planned where Naruto would stand when he fell. He set the wedge upright in the road and pressed 2 fingers to its tip. The ground around the wedge went hard. Naruto felt the shift in his knees, the little adjustment you make when a board turns to stone under your foot. It was more than that. The road itself stopped breathing. The grain that had some give, the dust that had some slide, gone. Naruto's body wanted to stick. He let momentum do what he always did, carry him too far. His toe caught stone. He should have stumbled. The wind caught him. He lifted on nothing again, just a breath's height, and it was enough. He rode that in D across the dead patch like a skate over pond ice. The priest with the chain swung it. The prayer knots whipped through air with a soft stutter. Naruto flinched. Not from the chain but from the cold He felt when the knots passed through his field of view, the way the space behind them felt cleaned. The chain wasn't meant to bruise. It was meant to scrub. He ducked and the chain hissed over his back. The hum in his chest leapt at the chain like a dog at a rabbit and he had to inhale hard to keep it low, keep it from becoming the kind of sound that makes bones remember a predator. He slid under and popped up inside the chain's arc. His hand chopped toward the priest's wrist, a short strike meant to be a question mark rather than an exclamation point. It landed on wood. The priest's wrist a slat of something under the cloth. Old armor, temple made, a tithing box taken to war, Naruto thought crazily, and pain bit down the edge of his hand. He swore. The priest's eyes in the mask were utterly calm. Naruto liked him less for that. The fan-bearing one flicked his wrist and a film drifted between Naruto and Kakashi like a curtain. The fabric's weave was wrong to look at. It made edges go uncertain. Kakashi's silhouette wavered on the other side like a reflection in river water. Naruto's stomach went hollow. He reached for the hum again. It offered him something that wasn't a growl. Is time. Something like a low note hummed against a drumhead, the kind that convinces the drum to sing back. He rolled it through his chest, out between his teeth. The curtain's weave shuddered and settled. The reflection sharpened. Kakashi's lazy eye found Naruto's past it and he arched a brow like, well, that's interesting. The wedge man pressed 2 fingers to his iron again, and the ground tried to seize Naruto's ankles. He didn't fight that directly. He let the pressure happen, went limp in his calves for a breath, and the air took the difference like a dancer's partner. Once you stopped arguing with how the world should move and asked how it wanted to, it was so much easier. He was laughing now. He couldn't help it, and it wasn't cocky, it was the relief of a lock unclicking. Kakashi-sensei, he called, not taking his eyes off the chain. This is, I can. Later, Kakashi said without heat. I brought you because you trip over solutions. Trip faster. Naruto grinned and tripped faster. The chain sang. The wedge blurred. The curtain tried to make the world a rumor. Naruto stepped inside a small column of regular air, turned his shoulder to the chain before it wanted to be there, hummed at the curtain when it wavered, and slashed his palm across the edge of the wedge, not to cut his skin but to make the air there care. It did. It wrapped the wedge in a tight sleeve of pressure. And for a breath it was just a chunk of iron with no temple lie inside it. Kakashi's kunai bit, sparked, and the tenketsu under the wedge wielder's collarbone went slack. He backed away with the calm of a man accepting loss as a line in a ledger. The cart creaked. One of the kids woke properly and sat bolt upright, small hands fisting the sackcloth. Sakura smiled at her with her mouth and kept her eyes on the chain with the rest of her face. "Hey there," she said, gentle, as if this were a clinic day. "Nap's over, okay, we're gonna move you. It's going to be loud." "Why?" The kid said, "Sleep rough." "Because kids ask for why in fires and the world still has to answer." Sakura's smile didn't flicker. "Because we're here." Naruto didn't have attention to spare for the warm bloom in his chest that had nothing to do with humming. The chain man had angled his wrist. A knot brushed Naruto's shoulder and something scraped him clean for a heartbeat, scouring more than skin. He jerked away instinctively. The hum inside tried to snarl and he tamped it, like telling a dog to heel while you keep your gaze on the stranger's hands. He caught Kakashi's nod. On 3, 1. Kakashi fainted. Hien tossed a shuriken not at a throat or a tendon but at the bell still spinning stupidly in the air. 2. The bell pinged against iron and for an instant admitted that it could in fact make noise. 3. Naruto took that noise and rolled it in the mouth of his growl and handed it back. The bell's silence tore down the road like a curtain pulled the wrong direction. The chain slackened. The F.'s curtain wrinkled like heat over asphalt. The wedge wobbled. Naruto took all of that and stepped into a kind of wind he hadn't known existed until now, one made from absence turning to presence. He felt it break down his shins and through his breath, and he put his palm where the chain man's shoulder would have to be to recover balance. The chain man met the palm like a man bowing to a teacher. He went to one knee because gravity is a lesson everybody learns. Kakashi rapped the wedge man's temple with the edge of his hand, clinical and almost bored. Sakura vaulted into the cart, scooped the girl and her brother with the economy of someone who'd lifted unconscious drunkards off clinic floors, and rolled out the other side with both of them alive and irritated. The masked men took stock. They were good at it. Naruto watched 3 quiet looks meet and decide. They faded back toward the trees, not retreating, not even that honest. They went thin and were gone. The bells didn't leave with them. One lay on the dust like a pretty lie. The other had rolled into the ditch and settled by a fist-sized rock, where ants already had a question about it. The wind that had been holding Naruto his hand like a cat slipping off a windowsill. He breathed in and out until his blood didn't feel like it had edges. Then he laughed again because his hands were shaking a little and because he hadn't learned how to be solemn about living through things yet. Kakashi pushed his Hittite up and stared at him over the true eye now. Surprise lived there. Not fear. Not yet. That, he said, was new. Yeah, Naruto said. He rotated his wrist. It felt like a hinge that had been oiled. Kinda came with the weather. Sakura's gaze was already cataloging the marks on Naruto's forearms. "You humming?" "I was," Naruto said, sheepish. "It helped. It did something to the bell. And the curtain. And maybe my bones." "Don't use that last one in a report," Kakashi said, deadpan. Hokage-sama doesn't like bone commentary. Naruto was still grinning when he felt eyes on him that didn't look like an enemy's. He looked left. Hinata stood half in shadow beside the lamppost that had killed itself earlier. She must have come with the patrol's tail unit. He'd missed her in the mess of bells and not sound. Her Byakugan was not flared now. She looked with plain eyes. She held a hand just below her shoulder as if steadying herself after a sprint. "Hey," he said, suddenly clumsy. "Good timing." She nodded once, small. "I saw your chakra. It braided when you moved. It was like..." She stopped, embarrassed by her own words, trying to get fancy. "It braided. That sounds cool," Naruto said, uncertain and charmed. "Braids are strong, right? For rope. They are," she said, "and for the span of that AGR." Even their conversation was as simple as rope. She glanced down at the bell by the ants and her mouth pressed tight. "I don't like those." "Me either," Naruto said fervently. They felt like getting scolded by a room. Hinata hid a smile and then let it show because why bother? "I can show you later. What your chakra did." "Yeah," he said, chest light. "I mean, yes, please," Kakashi said somethy. Into the Chunin down the road and then turned back with that mild teacher face that means he's just decided you're going to do something you thought was your idea. Sakura, take the kids the rest of the way in. Naruto, Hinata, you're on bell duty. Don't touch it with your skin. Because it's gross. Naruto asked. Because if you put your finger on a hole in the world, sometimes the world asks for more than a finger. Kakashi said blandly. Tenten can look at it. She collects problems. Hinata produced a strip of cloth and looped it around the bell with careful fingers. She knotted it twice and lifted. The bell swung without chiming. Naruto watched the line of her jaw. It was steady as a chalk mark on a practice mat. The wind lightened and then settled, like a dog circling its bed. They LKED the bell back up the road toward Konoha's rings, the lamplight coming back one by one as if choosing trust again. Naruto could feel the hum in his chest still, but it had downgraded from hungry to curious. He kept it low. He didn't want to startle Hinata with sound he couldn't explain. I'm glad you're okay, she said quietly after a while. You too, he said. You always show up right when things decide to get weird. She looked at him sidelong with something like amusement. You make things decide to get weird. True, he conceded. That's on me. They passed a little ramen stand just before the gate. The kind with a roof of old paper and a counter that had seen so many elbows it had remembered the shape of people. Naruto's stomach realized it was hollow like a struck drum. He slowed. Hinata did too, without asking why, and that was maybe the best thing anyone had done for him all night. Dinner, he asked, hopeful. I can, pay with bell money. He gestured to the cloth-wrapped silence. Hinata smiled. It was so slight it could have been a trick of light, but it stayed. I'll keep watch. They took the corner stools, set the bell carefully on the ground between them like a sleeping child they didn't want to wake, and ordered bowls. Steam climbed into the darkness like a promise. Naruto ate like he'd had to earn each bite in combat, which he had. Hinata ate tidy and quick. The old man behind the counter had bad knees and no curiosity, which was the kindest thing he could have had. You were humming, Hinata said after 3 mouthfuls. Yeah, Naruto wiped sweat off his lip. Is that weird? It's interesting, she said. When you did, the braids thickened. The flow didn't get louder. It got truer, he repeated, pleased with the weight of the word in his mouth. Feels right. She held chopsticks and courage in the same grip. Naruto-kun, when you turned to dodge the chain, the chakra near your left ribs, it shone differently for a moment. 9 points along your network glowed very faintly. They were quiet fireflies. Then they were gone. His jaw tightened without meaning to. He made his face do normal again. That's probably fine, he said lightly. Because he didn't know what else to say and because the thing that had woken in him earlier rolled in its sleep as if nodding. I mean, I feel fine. Better than fine. Like, he sought a simile. Like the river in my legs stopped arguing with rocks. Hinata's eyes softened. You don't have to explain it. He exhaled, grateful. Good, because I absolutely can't. You could come by tomorrow, she said. I can look properly. Not on a road. Not like this. Her hand flickered toward the bell between them. Tomorrow, he said. The word settled into his bones the way the hum had settled into his breath. Yeah, they finished their bowls and stood. Hinata lifted the bell with the cloth and they carried it through the gate as watchmen nodded them in with a mixture of respect and the boredom of men who needed paper to sign to make their day feel used. The village at night was not quiet so much as self-contained, lamps breathing in curtains, cats trading intelligence along rooftops. Distant laughter from a sake shop with the good dumplings. Kakashi peeled off for the Hokage with one of the Chunin to file the words that make the world turn. Sakura took the kids to a hospita. Bed and a nurse who'd cluck at them like a hen with hatchlings and make them feel safe enough to complain about the taste of medicine. Naruto and Hinata bore the bell to a small annex of the weapons hall where Tenten kept her mess. A clean mess, labeled in the handwriting of someone who doesn't trust future Tenten to remember past Tenten's thoughts. They found her cross-legged on the floor with a string of metal rings between her toes and a frown, threading wire through a little harp of steel. Please tell me that's not an ordinary bell, she said without looking up. If it is, I'll be very disappointed in the universe. It's a rude bell, Naruto said. It tried to make me bad at walking. Tenten looked up. Her eyes lit. Oh good, she said. A problem. Hinata set the bell down gently. Don't touch it with your skin, she said, and Tenten nodded as if she'd already made that rule for herself. Naruto left them to their craft talk, the particular brand that made him happy to listen to but not to star in. He stepped outside into the courtyard. The wind had settled into a patient crawl along the roof tiles. He could feel it without lifting his hand. He could feel the way the night wanted to be shaped. He lifted his palm anyway and let the breeze slide through his fingers. It tickled. It recognized him. He felt his own grin and let it be private, unobserved, a small sun under the skin. He didn't hear the footsteps until Hinata was near him. She didn't interrupt. She stood beside him and put her palm up too, like two kids comparing hand sizes. The wind slid over both their hands and paid them equal courtesy. What if this doesn't stop? Naruto said softly, surprising himself. What if it keeps opening? Hinata didn't look at him. She didn't have to. Then you'll learn to breathe through a bigger room. I'm good at breathing, he said, a little laugh in it. Been doing it a while. Her mouth tilted. I noticed. The night wore on around them, and when they finally went their separate ways, it was not with promises or declarations but with a practical plan. A time, a place, a training ground that collected dew in the mornings and burned it off by noon. Naruto took tea. He long way home along rooftops because the air under his feet still wanted to be steps, and he wanted to find out how many it would give him before he had to touch tile again. He didn't think about names for it. He didn't think about destiny. He thought about balance. When to lean into a gust, when to lay your shoulder against the shape of a push. He thought about Hinata's word, truer, and how it fit in his mouth like a bit of bread. Behind him, the annex lights burned another hour while Tenten argued with the bell in a language made of wire and patience. Hinata sat opposite her and drew diagrams in back and forth strokes. Not of the bell but of the way Naruto's chakra had braided, the 9 faint fireflies, the pattern they made when he hummed, and whether that pattern meant he could do Omoro what he'd done today without the air tearing something he'd need later. Far away from lamps and wind, in a room with floors lacquered black and walls the color of unlit tea, a man with the kin of calm that had earned him followers set a parchment down. Regent Shijima rested a knuckle against his chin and breathed in like he was smelling rain. He spoke, not to the room, but to the idea of one. The sovereign blood has surfaced. Of course it would choose a boy who laughs on rooftops. Across from him, the woman who carried the title of Archon Glass inclined her head. Her eyes had the clarity of sand after wave wash. We tested the bells, she said. He sang back. Good, Shijima murmured. It will make the hymn clear. He didn't sound happy or angry. He sounded like a man reading a line he'd always known was coming. Outside, storm thought gathered somewhere past the horizon, too far to matter and close enough to change the shade of the night. Naruto didn't sleep immediately when he reached his bed. He lay awake, listening to the way his breath sat in his chest, to the truer there, to the small quiet inside his ribs where something old had rolled over and found a more comfortable place to lie down. He thought of rules he might need and wrote the first of them on the inside of his skull with care. Don't point what can't be undone at a person's face. He turned on his side. The wind rattled his window a friendly inch and stilled. Tomorrow had a shape. He was ready to breathe it. Chapter 1 end. Chapter 2. Sandstorm Gambit. Sun baked the wind country flat and bright until the dunes kept their own time. By noon the horizon had a wobble like a thought you can't quite hold, and the wind that carried grit also carried news. It brought them a storm that wasn't a storm at all, too round, too obedient. The color of old parchment instead of sky. Tamari pushed hair from her eyes, set her fan's edge against the sand to mark a line, and squinted at the cloud swelling across the trade road. That's not natural, she said, dry as the country around her. If nature tried that, we'd fine it. Do you fine weather often? Naruto asked, leaning forward on the outcrop as if he old see more if the enthusiasm in his face had weight. Only when it forgets to file permits, Tamari said. Listen, Konoha, those gusts, they're shearing sideways and back. Whoever's driving wants the convoy to drift north, away from Suna patrol routes. People, drive storms. Sakura asked from behind the rock where she'd laid out bandages just in case and was pretending not to pick sand out of the rolls. Some very patient people, Temari said. She tapped the fan against the mark again. Some very bored people. Naruto stood. Heat shimmered off the rocks and the back of his neck prickled. The memory of last night. Air in his hands like a step that wasn't there. The hum that made bells remember they were metal and not gospel. He didn't call for it. He let the wind arrive on its own terms. Let it touch his forearms and read him the way a dog reads a stranger's mood. Convoy's the bait, he said. The storm is a fence. They're hurting. Good, Temari said without looking at him, which somehow landed like respect. Say what you see. Now don't do the stupid thing. What's the stupid thing? Naruto asked, running into visibility with the confidence of a man who thinks the desert is his friend. Oh, Naruto said, so, the thing I was about to do. Exactly. Suna Shinobi panted up the slope with rapt faces and squinted eyes, one of them lugging a rolled map like it was a child. They knelt beside Temari and opened it with the assistance of two flat stones. East and west etched out in dunes and footpaths and the thin blue knife of a canal, little carved markers stood say. NTRY where the patrols were supposed to be. They cut us off clean, the map carrier said, tapping north and then the blank to the right where the storm now churned. If they nudge the convoy into the old service road, there's a temple in that hollow. No patrols. The walls hold wind. Perfect place for quiet work, Temari murmured. Naruto, you still think fences are rude? Since I was about 5, he said. We're going to break it. We're going to use it, Temari said, and the corner of her mouth tugged. Try to keep up. She snapped the fan open one section at a time, the sound like crisp paper. The sand around them lifted by degrees as if the desert had decided to sit up straighter. Temari's first sweep didn't fight the storm so much as introduce itself. Her second sweep shook hands. The third drew a thin, clean corridor through the dirty tumble, a slice of calmer air that marched at an angle, wrong to the wind but right to the plan. The convoy would drift into that corridor if so. Me-one put a little pressure on the other side. I can push, Naruto said, already shifting weight. Temari shot him a look. You can ride. If you push blunt, they'll know we're here. Ride it is, he said. And tasted the air the way he'd tasted last night's storm. Seryu woke like a cat under his skin. The pressure in front of his shins softened, then firmed in a line that matched Temari's corridor. He stepped onto it the way he'd step onto a log crossing a river. Temari watched him catch the current and allowed herself one small, tight nod. There, she said, pointing to the swell where the road dipped. We meet them before the hollow. If you can shave the leading gust just a hair, I can lift the rear and you'll get your corridor without the storm noticing it's been graded. Haruno, you're our anchor, if this goes bad. You pull the driver's brains back to their eyes. And you. She paused because a blur of purpose with a bun and 3 tool rolls had arrived, trailing a sensor ninhu low. Oct prayerfully grateful to have handed her off. Tenten landed in a puff of sand, coughed, and held up a wrapped bundle like a proud ant. Sound channeling claws, she announced. Do not use to scratch. Do not chew. Do not let Naruto lick them. I don't lick things, Naruto protested. You lick air with your face, Tenten said. Which is fine, just don't lick the prototypes. She shoved a bracer into Naruto's hands. Narrow metal arcs across the knuckles with a small hollow chamber in each arc. If Byako decides to sing again, this will keep the note. There's a focusing plate on the wrist, twist to tune. Naruto slid it on. The fit snapped his breath short for half a second, not because it was too tight but because it felt like it had always belonged there and had simply been away visiting a cousin. Temari flicked open another segment of fan and brought the corridor in closer. Haruno, stay with the drivers. Naruto, with me. Tenten, you get to commit crimes against architecture in 10 minutes. Move. They moved. Sand hissed at their ankles like a friendly snake. The storm's edge ran like a dirty wall across the road, grain and grit and little stones nicked up and spun and put down again with a dour sense of duty. The convoy, a cart and 2 pack lizards with heads high and legs like board pillars, was already listing north into the wall. The drivers leaned on reins, swore, did a LL the little useless things men do when weather disagrees. Heya, Naruto said as he slid along the left flank. Easy smile, not war smile. We're going to make a lane. The older driver stared at him. Like people stare at a young man who says he's going to move air. Then the man saw Temari raise her fan and his face rearranged into the precise relief of someone who recognizes authority in their own language. He tipped his head. We'll follow. Good answer, Temari said. She brought the fan down and the rear winds eased like a sigh. Naruto flexed his fingers and felt the bracer hum as Byaku's note ghosted up his bones. He didn't need all of it, just enough to make the air care about his hand again. He ran the edge of his palm along the storm front, shaving turbulence the way you shave a burr from a board. The grid lost some of its bite. The corridor held. For a moment he wanted to grin about having shaved a storm with his fingers. He didn't. He breathed and kept shaving. You don't laugh with your mouth open during surgery, he thought, vaguely sure he'd heard that from Sakura once. You save it for after. They slipped the convoy through the honest part of wind into the tame part. The wall of grit tried to buck. Temari's fan said no in a long, patient stroke. Naruto rode the refusal and kept the corridor slick. It was like co-leading a dance with a partner who didn't cede control. But didn't mind your hand at her back either. They cleared the worst of it. The road ahead ducked into the shallow valley where the temple lay. An old stone crown protruded from sand, weathered door L. Intels and half a frieze depicting monks with their hands turned outward as if pushing something away. Tenten made a soft engineer noise in the back of her throat that probably translated to I am going to touch that. Not yet, Temari said. First the hair on Naruto's arms lifted. The valley went quiet in a way that didn't belong to the desert. Sound folded. It wasn't the bell from last night, it was bigger. A blanket instead of a coin. The drivers blinked, a little lost, and the pack lizard stalled with the sulky gravitas that large animals bring to any change of plan. Down. Sakura snapped from the driver's side, already dragging the old man from his bench. Naruto didn't hesitate. He pushed Temari's shoulder, and they both dropped as something thin and gleaming swept overhead. It cut the sand behind them into 3 clean lines like a barber's mistake. Figures stepped out from the temple's shadow. Masks again, but these had glass insets where eyes might be, pale panes with faint lines like frost in winter. One carried a frame of wire strung with fine sand that glittered without light. Another held a staff banded with black metal. The third, wrapped in pale gauze from throat to wrist, held nothing at all and didn't need to. Archon, Temari said under her breath, a warning to herself. Glass. The gauze-wrapped woman inclined her head as if to an equal. Her voice when it came was smooth and absent of malice. It could have been the voice of someone asking whether you'd like tea. We'll be taking the convoy. You may keep your storm. That's very generous, Temari said. If the convoy were yours. Everything is someone's, Archon Glass replied. Today it is ours. Naruto felt the ribbon of air under his feet collapse into ordinary. He didn't panic. Ordinary air been good to him long before this week. He glanced at Sakura. Already putting herself between the drivers and the temple, her fists tightened with a medic's preparedness, one to cut, one to close. Nten slid a toe under her pack and flicked it up to her shoulder without breaking eye contact with the wire frame. Temari set her fan vertical. Behind it, her posture lengthened like a blade being drawn. Naruto flexed his bracer. The hollow chambers over his knuckles flickered with promise. He didn't reach for the low growl yet. He called up something else, a steadier, weighty calm that sat in his thighs and heels. Genbu came on like putting your back to a wall that loved you. Archon Glass took a breath and the air next to her moved like Sand's idea of a mirror. The figure with the wire frame shook at once. Grains danced into patterns that hurt to look at. Sound dampened further. No, not dampened. Redirected, walked down a hallway, turned around politely. Temari tried a feint just to see what would happen. Her fan stroked upward and the sand peeled up from the floor of the valley in a ribbon. The staff man lifted his rod and tapped it once against the ground. The ribbon broke into chuff. Lead cards and fell in a rain of rectangles. Temari didn't waste the move. She had made the map she needed. 2 steps left, 3 right, she had her channels. Haruno, she murmured. Hands on the drivers. If you feel a pull that isn't yours, slap them back into their bodies. Got it, Sakura said. Naruto. Here, he said, and meant it. The hum woke. Byako again, not a roar but the low, bone note that had turned Bell's honest. He let it live in the bracer instead of his teeth. The little chambers swallowed and tuned, and a tight, clean vibration ran across his knuckles. The wire frame man angled his sand web to catch it. Naruto didn't give the note to the web. He ran it along the edge like a knife kissing a whetstone, making the wire frame sing back. The pattern in the glass eyes flickered. Archon Glass said, like a teacher surprised and pleased. Sorry, Naruto said, because his mouth didn't know how not to be rude in a fight. This is a bad time to steal other people's groceries. Borrow, Archon Glass said. Gonna go with no, Naruto said. You'll be returned, she said, as if she had to clarify the pronoun because she wasn't used to anyone ending a sentence without precision. Tamari broke the conversation with motion. She drove wind sideways into the wire frame and it flexed to catch it. Tenten was already there, sliding on her knees like a kid on polished floors. Drive. Opping a horseshoe of metal in the framework's shadow. The horseshoe bit sand and hummed imperceptibly, and the wire frame's lower edge sucked against it with quiet desperation, as if the ground had decided the frame should stay for dinner. Naruto dashed past the stuck frame and met the staff man at the left flank. The staff twitched toward his knee. Genbu shunted the force into the ground, his shin rang like a bell. But the pain wedged somewhere useful instead of fouling his balance. Naruto's counterpunch met the staff with the bracer's tuned edge and spent sound along it. The staff smelled briefly like rain on hot iron. The man's hands loosened, heat shocked, and Naruto slid under the counter swing and popped him in the ribs. Not to break, just to ask if his lungs were busy. They were. Behind him, the convoy creaked into the corridor Tamari had made. Sakura stood on the driver's bench, one hand on the old man's shoulder, eyes alert not to weapons but to a wrongness in the way people BL. Ink when thoughts are being lifted out of their heads. Stay with me, she told them, firm and slightly bossy, which is exactly the tone that keeps people alive. The gauze-wrapped woman didn't move like a fighter. She moved like a person testing a floorboard. She stepped once and the glass in her mask caught a curve of light that hadn't been born yet. Naruto's skin chilled. He knew a trap when the world tried to make itself polite. He slid left, trying to put Tamari between the woman and the convoy, and the space between them grew. Not distance, space. The air changed the idea of how far things were. The valley went wider and the convoy smaller. Tenten tossed him a line. Literally. A spool let fly, thin filament tracing a shining line through the air. Hook, she barked. Naruto grabbed without knowing what he was grabbing for. The filament bit the bracer like a handshake, little teeth along the wrist plate caught and held. He felt a tug not on his arm but on his place in the valley. Hold, Tenten said, and then set her heels, both hands on the spool. Tamari laughed once, a brittle little thrill, admiring and grim both, and fanned hard. The wind shoved against the shifted geometry and the world decided to be ordinary again because three people were now insisting politely and with enormous force. Cheater's trick, Tamari panted. Nice counter. I've got more cheating if you've got more tricks, Tenten said. Archon Glass stopped pretending this was a demonstration. She lifted her gouged hands and the sand near the temple's lip rose up, catching light where there was none, and clarified. Not into glass, into something near it. Curved planes, edges that weren't sharp until you looked at them and then they were. A cage formed in the air, and with it a second valley, offset and wrong. Folding over the first like a reflection laid on top of reality but refusing to match. Naruto's breath stuttered as his sense of where his knee was tried to find itself inside two different bodies. Don't look at what she wants you to look at, Tamari snapped, fan popping a new chord into the air. Look at me, I'm the horizon. Naruto's eyes found her. His lungs remembered how to be a bellows. He felt the hum line up with the way she held the fan, the breath cues of a wind caller who has spent her life teaching air to grow bones. He respected it. He stepped in time. He darted forward and the cage darted with him, trying to redraw his path to match a line he hadn't taken yet. The bracer whined under his skin. He turned the growl inside out. No voice, just the silent opposition of song. E1 bracing a door with their shoulder while a stranger tried to open it from the other side. The cage skidded. Not far. Enough. Right. 2 paces, then up. Tamari threw, sharp as a net. He followed. She drove wind under his heels and he climbed it, Garuda flickering just long enough to let him step on the wrong air and choose the right one instead. He broke through one arc of the cage and drop. Ed inside the ring nearest the wire frame. A figure lay bound under the temple's lip, a woman whose wrists had marks that meant the knots had been tied with faith. Her skin shone with the sheen of AC. Earth's seal sitting like a migraine over the heart. Naruto's stomach went hot, not with anger, he'd learned about that heat, but with friction against the idea that someone had decided this woman's blood belonged to a stranger's project. He didn't think. He touched the seal with 2 fingers and felt it glower at him as if he'd licked a battery. Phoenix rose like a match struck in a dry room. Heat flared lazy to eager to immediate. His chest went hollow the way blowing out candles does if you do it too fast. Care. Sakura started. I've got him, Tamari said, somewhere over Naruto's head, as if she had a hand on his balance. She didn't. It just felt like she did. Naruto eased the heat down like lowering a pot so it doesn't boil over. The seal buckled around his fingers, answered heat with hiss, and then popped. Quiet, ugly. Effective. The woman gasped, back arching. He almost swayed with the recoil. Phoenix was greedy, reaching back into his lungs for more. He set it down with both hands inside himself. No more. Not here. Not on someone else's pulse. I'll live, he said a little hoarse, before anyone could ask. She will too. Bold summer for a spring boy, came a voice at his shoulder. Crisp vowels through a breath he recognized. Naruto turned his head and Karen scowled down at him, hair a little wild from running in wind that fights you and a forehead crease that said she'd done. The Mathan didn't like any of the answers. Hi, he said, because he never learned to open with anything else around people whose sarcasm he respected. You got taller. You got louder, she said. But her hands were already on the freed woman, seal brushes clicking into place as if she'd been born with them attached. Don't Phoenix Raw, you're not a campfire. You're a stove. Use the dial. I used the dial, he protested. You yanked the knob, she said, and pressed 2 fingers to the woman's sternum. Breathe. There you go. Tenten, if you love me, tell me you brought a cooling lattice. Left pocket, Tenten said, without looking away from the wire frame that she was now dismantling with the happy determination of someone who had found a worthy adversary. Don't flirt with my pockets, Karen muttered. But her mouth went softer. She slid the lattice down the freed woman's shirt with the courtesy of a good medic and leaned over to look Naruto in the face. You okay? Better now, he said, and meant it. Karen sniffed. Flirt later. Don't die now. Deal, he said, breath steadying. Hinata. Here, Hinata answered, and he hadn't even felt her arrive because she could step into a room without teaching it the shape of her. Byakugan was up now, the veins delicate and stark at her temples, her posture steady. The cage is refracting chakra, she said quickly, economical with words, no lecture. Just the bit you need to aim. It bends sight lines and sound lines. Not a genjutsu, like a mirror hall. Break the mirrors, Naruto said, because simple is allowed to be true. Not all of them, Tamari cut in. A few. Force it to choose which valley it wants to be. Back right strut, Hinata said instantly. It's bearing more flow than the shape admits. Tenten grinned lick, someone who already had a blade in her hand before Hinata finished talking. My favorite kind of lie. She snapped her wrist. A weighted line shot out, caught the indicated strut, a curve of glass no. T-glass near the temple eve, and she yanked and twisted. The strut sang in a register that didn't belong outdoors. The cage buckled. The second valley stuttered. Archon glass tilted her head, measuring them anew. You pull well together, she observed. It makes me want to keep you more. Gross, Naruto said, and then seized his own weather. Seryu gusted, not as a gale but as a series of precise breaths. Inhale, cut, exhale, step. The bracer's chambers caught the breath song and tuned it. The staff man recovered enough to raise his rod, but Temari's fan pinned the angle wrong and his blow kissed dust. Hinata's voice rose, never loud, always carrying. On my call. 2 steps, swing, stop. Her eyes tracked flow. Her hands, slightly raised, counted. Now, Naruto obeyed. The hum under his S. Turnham met the line of her hand and the world cooperated. It felt like obeying a river you trusted. The cage reconfigured, stubborn. The air slammed toward the ground with a pressure change that made Naruto's ears pop. He glanced up. The sky had gone thoughtful. Clouds you could argue were not clouds were knitting themselves southeast on a diagonal, like some god had decided to comb the firmament. Don't, Hinata said quietly. Without looking at him. Not yet. I wasn't going to. Naruto lied, because Kirin itched along his arms the way lightning tests fences in summer. He respected the call anyway. He trusted Hinata's line more than he trusted the hunger in his epidermis. Archon Glass finally stepped toward them. She palmed air and a slice of the cage tilted down with the smooth obedience of a well-oiled gate. Naruto felt the pressure of her attention, not malice. Appraisal. He hated that more, somehow. Do you know what you are, child? She asked him like she might ask a novice their catechism. Messy, he said. Catalyst, she said. We don't leave catalysts for others to misuse. Too late, Naruto said. I'm already misused. She smiled, rueful without warmth. You'll break hearts, allowing yourself to be so literal. Only if I keep doing this, he said, and then stepped into her space without telegraph, because you are allowed to be rude to someone who builds cages. He didn't strike. He hummed into the bracer and let the note creep up into his jaw and then out through his teeth in a line facing slightly off her shoulder, at the cage's seam. The seam contracted like a wick pinched between fingers. The cage lost one option. Temari was there in the breath after, fan slashing down to nail the shape into a corner. Left, Hinata said. 2 degrees. Naruto shifted TW. 0 left and the world liked him better for it. The staff man roared finally, perhaps embarrassed by his own quiet. He swung the rod two-handed, overhand, classic temple form. Naruto met it with Genbu in his legs and Seryu in his shoulders, let the blow pour through him like a river through a well-set sluice. The rod hit ground with a crack that startled a snake into rethinking its day. Yuto used the bounce to drive an elbow into the man's chest. He went down. He would breathe again in a minute. Naruto liked that about this fight. Nothing had to be forever. The wire frame man managed to tear his tool off Tenten's trap with a wrench and a muttered prayer. Tenten darted in like a swallow and flicked her bracer, not the sound one, a new plate that sat at the wrist's underside and angled backward. Something hissed. Fine sand in the frame went from glitter to smoke. The frame was still a frame, but it had opinions about not being included anymore. Get the convoy through the inner gate, she yelled. Those statues will wake. I want to see how they move when they wake. Of course you do, Sakura said dryly, already herding the drivers toward the temple mouth. Naruto, if any of those rocks fall on my patience, I will make you do paperwork with the stern nurse. I fear the stern nurse, Naruto admitted. You should, Sakura said, and then put 2 fingers to the old man's neck and nodded once. Hearts steady. Keep him behind you. They hit the threshold and the temple woke as if grateful to be given a task. Statues carved with hands outstretched, and yes, pushing away, T also offering, shook loose generations of sand and stepped off their plinths like polite houseguests deciding to wash dishes. Their eyes, inlaid glass or something older, bloomed with soft light. Don't break them if you don't have to, Temari said, because love of city and love of history share a cupboard in your chest. Walls are load-bearing art. No promises, Tenten breathed, delighted, and threw a pair of weighted cloths that wrapped a statue's knees with the affectionate competence of a babysitter with twins. The statue paused, kneeling, not because it was truly bound but because the temple had rules about dignity and this felt like one. Naruto put his palm to a column as the first of the ceiling stones trembled. Genbu listened to the weight the way you listen to a friend tell you what hurts. He let the force come down his arm and out his heel into the floor and then into the next column. The crack veered. A slab missed Sakura's shoulder by a distance the exact size of a breath withheld. She released that breath and didn't waste it on thanks. She used it to count her drivers again. 2. Both still have names. Good. The temple's main hall was ahead, a wide rectangular spa. CE with long rails where banners had once hung, their ghosts still trembling. The floor tiles were worn smoother in the center where feet had argued philosophy. At the far end sat a dais with an inset where a relic should be and wasn't. Wonderful, Karen muttered. They've been feeding this place on purpose. She flared chakra in her fingers and a dozen fine red threads shot across the room to Saint April into the floor in a pattern that looked like a flower when you tilted your head. That's a confluence prep. Do not walk on the petals. Taking advice from a girl with a flower made of blood sounds like character growth for me, Naruto said, stepping carefully. The hum under his sternum tilted toward anxious curiosity. He kept it leashed, not because he was noble, but because he liked Karen's hands and didn't want to make her start over. A statue turned, slow and considerate, its hands moving to the pulling away gesture. Naruto felt something try to tug the wind out of his lungs, not to suffocate, not cruel. It felt like the part of a prayer where you exhale to make space. He decided not to make space. He hummed gently, and the statue's hands paused, as if remembering a time carved in to it when the temple had practiced not banishing, but welcoming. It lowered its arms. Naruto touched its shoulder in thanks, because why not be polite to stone that listened? Corridor, Tamari said, and did what she did to air to dust instead, laid it flat to make the room's center a path, pushed heavier grains to the sides where a misstep would make a noise. If we move like we mean to, the floor will consider us guests. And if we don't? Tenten asked, mouth curving. Then the floor will consider us practice, Tamari said. The gauze-wrapped woman crossed the threshold as if she'd been born inside it. The wind didn't dare muss her cloth. The glass in her mask found the long rails and made them repeat themselves. The hall stretched. The dais backed up as if shy. Stay here with them, Hinata told Sakura and the drivers. If I move my hand like this, she demonstrated a small, cutting motion. Close your eyes and put your forehead to the floor. It will mean the room is trying to rearrange your thinking. Do not look up until I touch your shoulder. Sakura didn't argue, not out of deference, but because she recognized competence as the quickest way to keep people living. Do your job, she said. I'll do mine. Naruto took 3 steps forward and stopped because something inside his ribs said wait. He listened and for once the something wasn't the hum. It was quieter, salt thick, a rush behind the ears. Leviathan had opinions about the pressure in this hall. He swallowed and let his inner ear notice the tiny changes. The left side of the room higher by a whisper, the ceiling. G pushing down in a wide dome only when the Archon was not looking at it. He rolled his foot and felt the tile accept him. Good. He could do this. Archon Glass said to the empty space, Regent, if you're listening. They're better assembled than you promised. A voice answered from the doorway of another world. No, from the side door, plain wood, perfectly normal. Naruto's heart forgot it had BDF. Asked a moment ago and reminded itself what steady felt like. A man stepped through in simple robes the color of sand that had already been stepped on. His hair was the gray of a morning that decides not to rain. He clasped his hands. Regent Shijima looked at them the way a careful doctor looks at a problem. No disgust, no joy. We promised nothing, he said. We shared a prediction. I'm pleased to have underestimated you. Temari's posture didn't change. I hate compliments in enemy mouths, she said softly. Fair, Naruto said. You carry too much, Shijima told Naruto with the kind of pity that requests no reply. You will split. Give it to us, piece by piece. We built a place for it. It will be held. You can be a boy again before your bones learn the habit of steel. Naruto didn't speak for a beat. He felt the 9 quiet points Hinata had named last night. Fireflies, they were there, somewhere in the weave. He thought about the old woman he'd freed and how Phoenix had tried to eat him to save someone else. He thought about how easy it would be to say yes to being a boy again. He thought about how galling it was, suddenly, that someone who didn't know him had used the word boy like a kindness and a trap. You built a place, Naruto said. Good for you. We built a promise, Shijima said. And forgot to ask the people you'd keep in it what they wanted, Naruto said. Which is a habit you should break. Shijima's face flickered, hurt, honest and small. We are trying to prevent gods from using you. Naruto shrugged, softer than he felt. I'll prevent them. With my friends. New habit. Archon Glass took a step then. And the conversation stopped being ethics and returned to the less polite grammar of fight. She lifted her hands and the hall tried to be longer again, Hinata's fingers snapped down. The tiny sign she had shown the drivers, and Naruto's eyelids obeyed before thought could make a case for curiosity. He felt the room reach for his mind and he pressed his forehead toward the idea of stone. The pull went by like a cold fish. Hinata's fingers brushed his shoulder. Up. Left rail weak, she said. They don't have enough of whatever this is to form a complete mirror. My cue, Tenten breathed. She had misbehaved on museum tours as a child, Naruto thought in fond terror, and had made the world more interesting for it. She sprang toward the weak rail, slapped a bar of adhesive along it. And the segment surrendered with the sad sigh of a perfect object admitting it had been faking. The hull snapped back to correct size. Archon Glass didn't flinch. She had more hallways in her hands. Naruto didn't let her set them. The clouds had come closer while they wrestled architecture. They were honest now. Even Temari's mouth had gone a little still at their frankness. Hinata saw his shoulders trying to decide. She tipped her head. Now, she said, ground it to their staff. And only a taste. Naruto kissed his teeth. Kirin leapt down his arms like a friend who sees you across a room and forgets to be polite on the way. He threw one hand up and the other down. The sky obliged him, immediate and eager, and lightning knifed along the line Hinata had Kae. The banded staff that had just lifted to block. The strike licked it and dove into the floor with a hiss. The world held together because he had given it a way to leave. The pressure flipped from High's pallet to his heels and shook itself out of the tiles in a rippling shiver. The staff man screamed, not in pain, in surprise at the amount of light now living in his hands. He flung the rod. It hit a pillar and stuck there, glowing like a regret. The statues paused to admire it and then went back to considering their assigned tasks. Archon Glass whipped a hand, and the cage tried to fold over Naruto alone like a chastity chest. Byako rose on its own, not angry but territorial. The bracer carried the note into the cage like dye into water. The pain nearest his shoulder crazed into a spiderweb of little fractures. He pulled his elbow in tight and drove it out with careful force. The pain went from cage to confetti. Regent, Archon Glass said without turning her head. We will need to retreat with what we have. Their breaths are counted, Shijima said. I hear each. Take what we can. We'll ask for the rest later. Naruto almost laughed, not mocking, an exhausted shock at how a man LD phrase kidnap the way he'd say borrow a cup of rice. He overrode the impulse because laughing at enemies leaks focus, and he needed every drop. Hinata's hand lifted and fell. 2-1. Temari's fan found the beat. Tenten's line caught another seam. Sakura called, eyes. To the drivers and got heads down at once. Karen murmured a seal and the freed woman's pulse stopped being frantic and became human again. Naruto stepped into the feel of everyone else doing their job and found the space that was his, the exact shape of it. He slid into Archon Glass's reach, palm open, not striking. He sung. Not a song with notes, not words. He tuned. The cage shivered. The mirrors turned to look at the world and see it clearly for a second instead of wanting to remap it. The Archon's mask angled, curious even now. Where did you learn that? She asked. Naruto smiled, sweating. Rooftops, he said. She sighed. Terrible teachers. The best, he said, and then he let the air be a floor under his foot. And took one step up that she had not accounted for. His palm met the edge of her mask and he didn't push her face, he pushed the glass. It went off her cheekbones with a clean pop. For a heartbeat he saw her eyes, not cruel. Focused. Tired. She breathed in like a person who had been holding their breath too long. We will meet again, she said, and the way she said it had the weight of regimes. Her hand cut a small curve and the room agreed to let her go. She stepped back through an angle that shouldn't have been a doorway and was, and the room became regular the way a face becomes unremarkable. Once you stop telling a story about it. Shijima didn't move to join her. He stayed where he was, still as water in a bowl. He took in Temari's stance, Hinata's eyes, Tenten's breathing, Sakura's hands, Karen's seal threads. Naruto's bracer. He nodded once, a bow you give to a shrine. I will keep asking, he said, and walked out through the simple wooden door that had always been there. They didn't chase. You don't chase a tide out. You build higher before it returns. The temple sighed once in its rafters and then relaxed like an old house after people leave. The statues went back to being what they had been carved to be: sermon illustrations, load-bearing art. The drivers blinked up and counted bags, fingers quick, relief a little selfish and therefore honest. The freed woman slept now, mouth slack with post-pain. Karen's lattice feeding her cool like a winter draft in summer. In the middle of the hall, Tenten sat down hard and hugged her knees and laughed once, a crack of sound like a starting pistol. "I love work," she announced to the ceiling. Tamari leaned her fan against her shoulder and looked at Naruto without the adversarial edge. Respect lived there now, reluctant and genuine. "Which is the only kind that sticks?" "That slipstream cut," she said. "Teach me." "Only if you teach me how to get the wind to stop treating me like a puppy," he said. "You are a puppy," she said. "Fair," he said. Hinata crossed to him, Byakugan fading, eyes tender and tired. "You followed every call," she said. Pride was in it, but it was not possessive pride. It was pride that people feel when they share work. "I like your calls," he said, low and honest enough to make the back of his neck warm. "They sound like home." Karen overheard with one ear and rolled her eyes like a protective cousin. "You can flirt after I stop you from boiling your lungs. Sit." He sat. She put a seal on his sternum without apology and he hissed when the cool sank in. "Don't act brave. You're made of meat." "The meat is impressed. But it's still meat. Meat that hums," Tenten said, tracing the bracer's lines with the kind of tender greed people reserve for toolboxes. "How did it take the note?" "Like it was thirsty," Naruto said. "But controllable thirsty. Like a camel." Tamari snorted. "Please never do metaphors again." "I will absolutely do metaphors again," he said. Sakura shook dust from her hair and came to stand with them. Expression soft in the way she rarely allowed during a mission. "No casualties," she reported. "Just pride, and we can't bill for that." "Shame," Tamari said. "The treasury would be full." They got the convoy moving once the hall stopped feeling elongated. Hinata walked beside the freed woman on the cart, two fingers lightly at her wrist to read pulse. Tenten collected her traps with the affection of someone putting toys into bins. Tamari spoke with Suna patrols in short, precise sentences that made decisions approach willingly. Sakura ate a handful of salted dates with the air of a person who knows how to feed a body back from emergency. Karen spun seal threads into a little net and tossed it over Naruto's chest like a blanket. He tolerated it with the patience of a cat tolerating a hat. On the dune above, near where they'd first seen the storm being steered, Naruto stopped and looked back at the temple. The stone was old and had not asked for any of this and had behaved anyway. He made a small, silly bow with two fingers to his brow. The wind made a kindly nothing sound. "Regent won't quit," Tamari said, coming to rest a hip against the dune, eyes on the horizon. "Men like that never congratulate themselves into retirement." "I know," Naruto said. "It's okay. Is it?" Her tone made it a challenge rather than a comfort. "No," he said, "but we're here." "That's not nothing." She let that stand. A gust lifted. Not the storm's rude hand, just the country breathing. Naruto raised his palm and the air checked in like a bird to a window feeder. He didn't take it into tricks. He let it go. "Rules," he murmured. Hinata glanced over from the cart, curious. "New ones." "Same one," he said. "Don't point what can't be undone at a person's face." He thought of the Archon's eyes now that he knew them. He thought of a cage and a mask coming off with his palm on glass instead of skin. And listen when Hinata says not yet. Hinata's ears colored the smallest amount, which felt like winning a bet he hadn't realized he'd placed. They made camp where dunes broke to hardpan. Stars came out with embarrassing clarity. The convoy folk slept all at once. That full body collapse of people whose day had been too full of stories. Tenten set building plans in the sand with little rocks, a city she might make someday out of wind and wire. Tamari oiled tea. He fanned with a rag that smelled like home. Sakura went to check the freed woman's pupils and ended up telling her a badly timed joke that made both of them wheeze laughs into their bedding. Karen dozed with her cheek on a scroll. Hinata stood watch with eyes not flared, simply paying attention. Naruto watched the sky till his head felt big with it. He felt the 9 points in his network like dim lamps left on in other rooms in a house. He didn't knock on their doors. He didn't have to. The doors were polite, available, patient in a way he hadn't expected anything inside him to be. He rolled on. His side and studied the curve of Hinata's shoulder under her cloak, the way she held herself like a promise made to other people and kept in the small ways. He slept finally, and the dreams were honest. Rooftops. Bells that lost their arrogance, a mask popping off like a cork, a fan that could tell wind what it wanted to be, a hand on his sternum keeping the fire from eating more than it should. Far away, in a room that chose to be quiet, Regent Shijima poured water into a bowl and watched the ripples settle. Archon Glass stood beside him, mask off, eyes somewhat warmer for having met resistance that didn't gloat. "You were right," she said after a time. "I was persuasive," he said. "Rightness is a different art. He's not just a vessel," she said. "No," Shijima agreed. "He's a lesson." "And what is the lesson?" she asked, not mocking. "That we should have started practicing rescue instead of extraction," he said. "Long ago." She made a soft sound, half laugh, half warning. "You'll get yourself redeemed if you keep that up." He looked into the water at his own face and the faces of the people who had followed him into making cages out of love. "We will require more than one redemption," he said. Outside their walls, a thin blue bolt tapped the horizon and wandered off. It had been invited by no one. It had hurt no one. It had let the sky know it was paying attention. Mornin'. G would bring decisions and dusty throats and the slow work of getting people home. Night had brought them a new rhythm instead of an answer, and Naruto found that he preferred it that way, a beat he could step to. A call he could say yes to, a wind that would hold his weight for a breath because he asked without grabbing. He would keep asking. He would keep learning how. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Sky Over Taki. Mist rolls make their own roads. Takigakure sits where cliffs remember an old river's stubbornness, water throwing itself off green stone in ribbons so thick the air forgets how to be dry. Naruto put his hand out and the spray feathered his fingers, cool and constant, the kind of touch that convinces your pulse to keep pace with something bigger. "Pretty," he said. Hinata's eyes tracked up the rock face, cataloging ledges and hollows the way a musician hears places to rest breath. "And loud," she said. "Good for hiding movement. Bad for hearing your name." Tamari planted her heels on a root with the sureness of a woman who knows where she ends and the ground begins. "Bad for fan edges, too," she muttered. "Air hates directions when it's wet." Karen flicked water off her sleeve and glared at the waterfall like it had made a scheduling error. "Great. Let's rescue an acid in a blender." "Phew," Hinata corrected, gentle but firm. "She's a person." "Right," Karen said, the patience of someone editing herself in real time. "Let's rescue a person in a blender." Tenten had already unrolled something shaped like an idea, 2 slender rods, kite-light lattice between them. "And a reel that hummed even before you spun it." "Wind skates," she said, proud and apologizing in the same breath. "They pretend the spray is stairs." She nudged one toward Naruto. "Don't lick them." Naruto pretended he was above that joke now and failed. "No promises." He strapped in. The rods sat against his calves and ankles, light as intention. He touched the lattice and felt it catch the fall's breath, not fighting it. Just finding the parts of the water that wanted to be ladders. Hinata stepped onto rock slick as glass as if it were a tatami mat. Tamari shook her fan loose and wrung a corridor out of humid air with small, economical cuts. Karen tied seal slips around her wrists like bracelets. Tenten grinned the grin of an artisan whose work is about to be tested in the meanest laboratory, a mission. "Archon activity?" Tamari asked the local guide, a boy with rope scars across his hands and an expression that said he'd already decided to become old later. "They put nails in the cliffs," the boy said. "Tall ones. The lightning doesn't want to come here anymore." "Storm grounding," Hinata murmured. Naruto's shoulders itched where Kirin liked to stretch. The itch turned sheepish. "They put lightning on timeout," he said. "Rude." "Take the nails out," Tamari said. "Can I use them as darts after?" Naruto asked, hopeful. "Please don't," Hinata said, eyeing the drop and doing range math. Naruto filed the ask under "be good when she's watching you." The list was long and he liked it that way. They went up the wet stairs. The roar swallowed talk. You had to speak with your body. Temari's chin cut. "Go left." Hinata's fingers splayed. Wait. Tenten's shoulders dipped. Snag that seam. Naruto let Garuda thread itself along his shins and calves. No full leap, just that sly acceleration that turns slick into slide. Genbu kept his weight honest when the rock under his boot thought about quitting. Leviathan woke in his ears, the pressure sense that says the air's weight is changing and the water's about to reach for you. Halfway up, they found the first nail. It wasn't a carpenter's tool. It was a line of iron prayer, taller than Naruto and banded with text too old to be legible, humming. Lightning is a song and this nail knew all the verses and told the sky, kindly but firmly, to go home. Cute, Tenten said, circling. If you like prison bars, do not touch with your, Karen started. Skin, I know, Naruto said. He leaned close enough to feel the hair on his arms pull. You have friends. 3 more, Hinata said, Byakugan open now, veins like delicate calligraphy at her temples. Corners of a square. If we remove one, the others will fight. We remove 2, Tamari said. Opposites. Make the shape confused. On my count, Hinata asked, and Naruto see. Old have fallen in love with that habit of hers 20 times a day, the way she made group work sound like an art. They split. Naruto skated to his nail, caught spray through the lattice so it stiffened, and set his palm an inch from the iron. Leviathan wanted to push sideways, Genbu wanted to hold. He split the difference and made a pressure pocket that didn't shove the nail so much as convince it the cliff was exhaling. He met Hinata's gaze across wet air. Her fingers folded down. Now. He let the pocket pop. The nail jumped free with a sound like a monk coughing mid-prayer. Naruto yelped and snapped Garuda through his ankles, turning the falling nail into a slow fall instead of a cascade-ending catastrophe. It dropped into mist with a sulky hiss. Opposite, Temari's fan cut the world's ag. Vehement that the second nail should stay, the iron gave up and slid. The river changed mood without asking permission. Clouds glanced down like startled birds. Oh, right, you can come here again. The hair on Naruto's neck went alert. He let the itch along his arms be itch. Hinata's earlier not yet lived in his tendons. The ledge above held an altar someone had tried to pretend wasn't one by putting sacks and ropes on it. Naruto's teeth ached the way they do when prayer and geometry get mixed up. 2 masked figures stood beside it, gauze not unlike glasses but thinner, practical for damp. Behind them, a girl hovering like a kite without a string, hair green as wet moss, smile bright and sharp as a pin. Her gaze scanned them, professional, curious, not fearful. When it hit Naruto, her expression hiccuped and she grinned wider. Are you the loud one? She called, cheer carrying absurdly well through water noise. Naruto saluted with 2 fingers, already fond. Who told you that? The wind, she said, and Naruto was lost. People who listened to elements like they were gossip were his kind of people. Fu, Hinata called up, not loud, somehow heard. We're with Konoha. We came because it's safer if many are loud together. Fu rolled in midair like a bored hawk, casual. They want to wash me, she said, tilting her chin at the masked pair. Like I'm a stain. You here to say stains make stories? Something like that, Naruto said. One of the masked figures lifted a hand and struck a bell-shaped wrong for a temple and perfect for a mind. It didn't chime. It breathed. Sound folded ound it and came back as a chord that knew your birth name. Naruto felt it in his sinus and the base of his skull, the place memories stacked chairs. The ledge shifted, not physically, memory shifted. He smelled broth. He was small again. Stool too short for his legs, bowl too big for his hands. Don't. Hinata's voice threaded through the memory, not fighting it, existing beside it like a second river. You're here. Breathe with me. He tasted miso that wasn't there and then the taste receded like a tide because Hinata had named the present and his body trusted her. The bell swung again. A street, lanterns, chanters. People turning to him with uncomplicated welcome. The ache was so old it didn't register as ache until something in him leaned toward it. Here, Hinata said, and touched his wrist. Just that. A point of pressure. The ledge existed again. The waterfall existed. Fu hung in air with her head cocked, evaluating his refusal to be lulled not as a moral victory but as data. Hinata's hand stayed. Anchor and metronome both. Naruto nodded. Once. He was not proud of his resistance. He was grateful. Archon Bell dropped from the shadow of the altar like a star losing its temper. His mask had tiny slits that made his eyes look like a pattern more than an organ. The bell in his hand was smaller than last night's thieves' tools, a throat bell, the kind meant to signal silence or prayer. It rang without ringing and Naruto's knees almost decided to be someone else's. Back, Tamari snapped. Wind picked up around their ankles, her fan drawing a line on the ledge that told the bell where it was allowed to fold sound. It obeyed a little. The masked assistants moved like a pair that had practiced in small rooms. One set a slip on the altar, the other reached for Fu with a seal string. She wasn't there when the string arrived. She was 20 feet to the left, laughing, which is a rude thing to do in a kidnapping and therefore perfect. "You're slow," she said, not cruel, just delighted. "The air tells me when you think." "Show off," Tenten muttered, admiring. Naruto slid in under a low arc of bell pressure that tried to tuck his thoughts into a drawer. He let Byaku's note gather in the bracer, kept it under his breath, and blew it sideways. The bell hiccuped. The air around the altar stopped being confident and went back to being a drafty shrine. Bell didn't bother with conversation. He rang again, and this memory was not food or crowds. This one was almost nothing, which is a terrible lure, the quiet room where no one needed you. Naruto's chest moaned for it in a way that made him want to laugh at his own hungry heart. He had just learned he liked being needed. Of course a part of him wanted the other thing. You always want the opposite of what you learn to love last. "Here," Hinata said again. And her voice didn't try to compete with the bell's promise, it said a smaller promise beside it. "If you choose this, you are not alone in it." The smaller promise won because it was truer. Naruto felt something old in him stir. Not phoenix, not tiger or dragon. Darker, gentler. Baku uncurled like a night animal opening one eye at a campfire. The bell made memory into fog and Baku tasted fog for lies. Naruto didn't guide it, he allowed. The hum dropped past voice into a pressure in his soft palate that wasn't sound at all and then slid outward. The edge of the world where thought meets dream frayed. Bell's trick lost a handhold. Archon Bell jerked. Not physically, the mask made him unreadable, but Naruto felt the adjustment. Another chime. This time the memory had claws. A table. His name on a roster as if he were wanted. A woman's laugh that sounded like he liked himself when she laughed. Baku breathed in, slow. The dream wrinkled like paper in damp. Naru. To step through the soft spot and punch the bell, not hard, bracer humming. The bell wasn't designed for being treated like a bell. It spun out of Bell's hands and clanged against altar stone. The clear sound of it made the earlier false sounds shrink in embarrassment. "Sorry," Naruto panted, "very not sorry. Sounds for everybody." "Cute line," Tamari said, passing him on the right, fan cut. Ing into the space by Bell's hip to keep him from regrabbing his tool. "Don't reuse it." Fu arrowed in, body horizontal in air like she'd been born as a thrown spear. She clipped the seal string with 2 fingers and the paper fluttered into the falls with a disgusted sigh. "You're boring," she told the assistant. "Try being a little ridiculous. It helps." The assistant, to his credit, tried to be ridiculous. He flung 3 slips like confetti. They tried to land on Fu and Naruto and Hinata and Tamari and Tenten and Karen at once, 5 little teeth meant to bite focus. They stuck to wet as well as rain sticks. Tenten whipped a narrow cloth through the droplets and all 5 slips stuck to it like a toddler's hands to a cookie tray. She flung the cloth back at the assistant's face with gentle contempt. He reeled. Insulted religion wars with physics. Bell pivoted and rang his throat bell against a second, smaller bell hidden in his sleeve. The harmonic crawled under Naruto's jaw. Words become gum in pressure like that. He didn't need them. Baku fed. Not on dreams, on the little seam where dream touches intent. The seam tasted of copper and fatigue. He tore it delicately, like pulling a thread free from a shirt you like. Illusion slumped. Byaku's bracer note ran down the crumbling trick like rain along a window. "Stop unmaking my music," Bell said. It was almost the first honest thing he'd said. "Then stop making it about cages," Naruto said, honest back. He felt it before he saw it. A pattern below, under the ledge, under the altar, under the cliff, the careful humming of a room that had been told to be anything but a room. Hinata's eyes cut down. There's a chamber, she said. Tuned to you. Of course there is, Karen said. Why make one cage when you can put the better cage inside the first one? We go, Temari said. Bell reached for his bell again and Naruto let him, almost. He wanted the man to have something to ring later when Naruto cracked the chamber. He wanted the sound to clash and make a mess. He grinned at Hinata without meaning to. She shook her head and almost smiled, and that was better than mischief. The entrance was not a door. It was a negative space behind the waterfall. The kind of hole you find only by sticking your fingers in what looks like rock because you decide to touch the world where it refuses being looked at. Naruto slid through, Garuda at his ankles, making space in the water where none should exist. Hinata followed, her breath measured. Temari came sideways, fan held like a shield against the pressure, tendon ducked in with two bundles clamped between her knees. Karen swore because scrolls and water have never been friends and she refused to pick which one to save later. The chamber breathed like a throat singing a low, fevered note. There were lines on the walls in that older script that looked like a river had tried to teach itself to write. They pulsed faintly. Naruto felt 9 faint pricks along his network answer, like polite knocks on his windows. The floor was not one plane. It was the suggestion of planes that intersected with the creativity of a child and the arrogance of a mathematician. People, villager, S with rope burns on their arms and the empty look of folks who have been explained to too often, knelt along the back wall, heads bowed where bowing was the safest thing they could do. A slick of say, Al fluid crawled like lazy ants around their ankles. Bell's voice filled the narrowness like a silk scarf in a jar. Do not step where you think you should. So everywhere, Naruto said. Fu squeezed in last, shaking water off her hair like a dog. She hovered a foot off the floor with the ease of someone doing something so often she forgets it violates expectations. Her eyes found the bound Villag. And for the first time her grin went away. Her face didn't shift to anger, it shifted to what you were when weather turns and you don't get to vote. I can. Temari started. Wait, Naruto said, "'Cause the urge to run at a problem with your whole chest is a good urge and also a trap in rooms like this." He let Leviathan rise to his tongue. Pressure lives on your tongue and in the little pores by your ears. If you learn to read those places, your feet stop being idiots. He exhaled slowly. The air by the left wall weighed more than the air by the right. The line across the center with the river writing wanted to suck in. He touched his bracer, tuned Byako low, and felt the hum map the room, the walls giving back the pitch they had been told to keep. Do not be heroic, Karen said, like a friend laying a coat over your shoulders. Be correct. He moved. Not a lot. 19 inches to the side, 8 forward, 1 sideways again. The floor accepted him. He could have cried from relief at something so stupid as footing. Temari passed him to the villagers with long steps, fan at her hip. Hinata came to his shoulder and said, 3 marks in the air. Pressure lines. They shift. Time them. Her fingers marked the beats. He followed the second and felt the second give a fraction more than the first. He shoved the moment open with Garuda, stepping into air thin and precise like blade edges stacked on top of one another. Bell rang. It wasn't the mind chime this time. It was the sound you make when the room is tuned and you hit the note it wants to be so badly that anyone not already a part of the song will be mashed flat. Naruto hummed back, Baku prickling his sinuses, but he kept it out of this. Baku was for dreams, not for architecture. Byako took the lead. The bracer rang so soft it was almost not there. The piece of room that had wanted to join Bell's note remembered it was Old Stone first, and nobody gets to choose Old Stone's hymns but gravity. Karen slid to the villagers and lifted a woman's chin. With me, she said. Not tender, not hard. Blink. Good. Keep blinking. She threaded a seal through the crust at their ankles and the seal turned into obedience, which is a stupid thing for a seal to be. And dissolved. Temari's fan made dry air around the rope sighed at the yield and let people pull their skin back from it. Bell was, very calmly, losing patience. He stepped into the chamber with a little halt in his step, like a man who loves music more than he loves people realizing which one he had chosen. He rang again and for a breath the chamber tried to be a throat again and swallow Naruto whole. Hinata leaned in until he felt the heat of her cheek. This is lie breath, she whispered. Breathe around it. He did. It's stupid how much that helped. Fu flared higher and the pressure lines stuttered. The chamber did not like people ignoring its traffic laws. She tucked into a tight roll and emerged over the villagers, flipping upside down to look the youngest of them in the eyes. "Hi," she said, the grin back now because she had work. "We're leaving." "Okay," the kid said, because some people make okay obvious. The chamber took Fu's altitude change as insult and tried to clap. Two plates of knot floor rushed together. Naruto slid between them on a breath made hurried by terror and trained by practice. He felt his shoulder scrape annoyance off the near plate. The hum in his bracer sharpened. "That's enough play, be serious." He palmed the junction where two lines of script met and pressed levy into it, pressure sideways, not down. The plate paused. It wanted to close like a jaw. He pried it like the lid of a tight jar, patient, using the room's hunger against itself. The plate realized it had been rude and abashedly finished not closing. "Thank you," Naruto told architecture like a madman. Tamari didn't even snort. She'd started talking to buildings years ago. Bell finally changed tack. He struck his bell and then he spoke over it, not aloud, into it. Words fed to metal. The sound that came out was not his voice. It was the chamber speaking Naruto's name from 10 different angles, some that sounded like a father, some that sounded like the ocean under a cliff. Some that sounded like an apology. All of them wanted the same thing. For Naruto to stop being the kind of problem that arrives with friends. Baku padded forward sighed Naruto and looked at the many names and blinked its heavy eyes. It was a polite creature. It didn't like rude dreams. These were polite lies wearing his name and that offended it in a way he found endearing. He didn't push Baku. He opened a door. The seam between chamber voice and his ears split like wet paper. Dream hum leaked. Baku ate it with the care of a housecat licking spilled milk from between the letters of a book. The voices kept speaking his name. The part of the sound that made them mean did not reach him. He stepped through. He could have gone for Bell then, at the throat, at the bell, at the wrists. All the nice target spots you learn in long afternoons while your teacher reads terrible haiku. He didn't. He went for the poor bastard nearest the wall whose eyes had glazed. Because this room had eaten his sense of self. He put his hand on the man's shoulder and said the smallest truth he could think of, "You're here." The man choked. He was here. Sometimes that is enough. The chamber groaned because it had been outmaneuvered by a sentence a child could manage. Tamari got two more villagers free on the groan. Hinata's hand lived at Naruto's wrist, anchoring him to the current moment like a weighted ribbon on a balloon. Tenten, fully unstoppable now, laid a three-pronged thing across one script line and nodded when it failed to cut. "Good," she said. "Means it's load-bearing." She punched a second, smaller prong beside it and the script sang a tone that meant fine, "I can be not load-bearing if you insist." Bell moved to block them with that priest's economy of motion that wastes nothing on flourish. This time Naruto did take the bell out. He hummed wrong notes into the bracer, little dissonances that make precise things ugly. The bell faltered long enough for Fu to dart in like a sparrow stealing bread and snatch it. She tossed it once, caught it with a little oops, and then looked at Naruto's face. Give it to Tenten," he said, and Fu pulled a face at having to share treasure with someone boring enough to catalog it. Tenten took the bell with tender menace. Karen's last seal crumbled. Villagers stretched their rope-burned wrists and looked at Naruto like people who haven't made up their mind yet how much they can afford to hope. He nodded to them because you don't say any of the big promises. Safe, saved, you say nothing, and then you mock. Sure your back is in front when the next bad thing comes through the door. The next bad thing came through, right on cue. Not Bell. His assistants, 4 of them, with rods that thrummed. They jammed the rods into the floor and the chamber shifted keys. It stopped being a throat. It tried to be a lung. "Up," Hinata said. Now, Fu didn't need orders. She hauled 2 villagers into air by the backs of their shirts like kittens. Tamari shoved a pulse of wind under the other's feet. Naruto took the last one and almost bounced a skull on a stone line because the cough of the chamber hit his knees wrong. He got the height. He felt something behind his eyes strain, a little too close to bad. Karen's palm hit his sternum and the cool of a seal slid down his ribs, scolding him for trying to be Allah. DDER in a dam and the part of the river that sparkles. Meat, she said in a monotone, as if reciting a catechism. You're made of it. Very moving, he wheezed, grateful. They stumbled out through the fall in a messy spill that made the water resent them for a breath and then decide to forgive. The sky had finished deciding to help. Clouds layered like ideas. Lightning tested edges like a boy tapping a fence with a stick. Naruto, Hinata said, eyes on the nails above. You can, now. Oh good, he said, and let the itch be an invitation. He threw his right hand to the sky and his left toward the cliff. And Kirin leapt because he had given it a place to land that wasn't a person. The strike ran down the path the nails had designed, except 2 nails were missing and the path kinked hard where Tamari had convinced it to. The lightning slid off the cliff the way water slides off oil and dove for one of the rods the assistants had planted near the chamber entrance. The rod drank, sputtered, and exploded like a bad candle. Naruto didn't flinch. Leviathan had already plucked 3 holes underneath, pressure pockets waiting. The rod's shrapnel took those pockets as birthplaces and went where he told them, out, into rock. Not into people. It was a mean trick that kept everyone breathing. He could live with mean. Bell didn't leave. He could have. He held his ground while everything he detuned tried to go out of tune around him. He rang his last note. It was a little heartbroken. It carried regret like a smell. We'll take you later, he said. Ask, Naruto said, and tasted the A for humorlessness in his own mouth and let it stay. We're getting good at saying no. Bell bowed. It wasn't sarcasm. He stepped back through rain and was gone. Fu set the last villager down and put her hands on her hips. Floating a foot off stone because to hell with orthodoxy. You were very fun, she told Naruto. You too, he said, wind wet and Bell dirty and weirdly happy. I've been alone with Sky for a long time, she said. Not sad exactly. If people are going to hunt you for what you are, you should pick the loudest ones to stand by. Welcome to Volume, Tamari said, and she made it sound almost like a privilege. The patrols took the villagers with grateful gruffness. Karen shooed 2 medics into doing her cleanup for her and then complimented them until they nearly cried on the spot from professional joy. Tenten wrapped the bell in 7 separate bags and then wrapped those bags in a moral opinion about bells. Hinata squeezed water from her hair and stood watching the place. Where the chamber had been like she was filing it somewhere she would be able to find in sleep. On a cliff lip that caught the last mess of sunset, Naruto and Hinata sat. Fu hovered cross-legged like a trick in bad theater made good by sincerity. The falls gave them a curtain no one bothered to look behind. You left a winnable fight, Fu said, testing the taste of the choice in her mouth. People were caught, Naruto said, as if the sentence had built itself and he'd only signed off on it. The fight wasn't going anywhere. Feels good to not be the only one who thinks like that, she said, quiet. Then, cheerful. I'm coming with you. If that's a thing. I don't like being cleaned. We're not tidy, Naruto admitted. Perfect, Fu said. Hinata's shoulder pressed his, not a lean, just acquaintance. The waterfall's mist cooled the skin at his throat. The 9 quiet points in him were not quiet anymore. They hummed like lamps behind doors in a corridor you walk at night to make sure the house is still itself. He didn't open any farther than he had during the fight. He didn't have to. The house was content. Thank you, he said. It wasn't to Hinata alone, or Fu alone. It was to being here at all. Hinata's breath counted with his for 3 cycles because that's a kindness you can give anyone. Then she stood. We should go, she said. Tamari and Tenten will start taking apart the world if they have to wait any longer. True, Naruto said, and then, bravely for a man who had nearly been eaten by Arun's opinion, added, ramen later. Hinata's mouth curved. Yes. Fu made a fac. That said she didn't understand noodles and was excited to learn. Did they fly? No, Naruto said, but they feel like it. Sold, Fu said. They dropped off the cliff in staggered styles. Hinata neat, Fu made of joy. Naruto pretending his feet were smarter than they had any right to be, and the falls breathed behind them with relief that no one had tried to turn it into a song it hadn't chosen. Far away, in a dry room where water could be heard only in memory, Regent Shijima brushed damp from a bell and set it on a low table. He looked at his hand and it looked older. Archon Bell's mask lay beside it like a tired animal. He eats dreams, Bell said, not shocked, not aggrieved, curious, like a scholar meeting a better book. He refuses good cages, Shijima said. Rude, Bell said, and sat down slowly. As if sitting and thinking were the same gesture. Shijima smiled without warmth, hopeful. He put his palm over the bell, not touching skin to metal, because he had learned at least that much. He spoke into the space above it. To whoever had ears. We will ask again. Water ran somewhere none of them could see. Air made steps where it wanted. People carried other people out of rooms tuned for theft. The night decided not to come all at once. It came in from the edges to give them time to decide who they were on the way down the path. Naruto decided he was the sort of person who sked win for a favor and returned it later with interest. He had no proof that's how favors worked. He had friends. It would do. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Red Spiral Sea. The sea around the ruins of Tsushiogakur runs red when the light's wrong. Rust from sunken forges, kelp with iron in its spine, legend staining water with memory. Naruto stood on the prow of a narrow cutter and let spray mark his cheeks. The archipelago rose ahead in broken spirals, teeth gnawed down by storm. Far below, something old hummed through the keel like a tuning fork remembering a song. Hinata shaded her eyes. Reefs there, and a long sandbar pretending not to be a sandbar. She extended 2 fingers like a conductor teasing a section upright. Currents are arguing. The left one will win. Tamari bent over a map she'd hand-drawn on waxed canvas. It already had corrections on top of corrections. We give them a corridor, she said. Make the argument boring. Never thought I'd be grateful for boring, Tenten said. Securing a case to the rails. She flipped the latches with affection. Line launchers. They bite rock like pessimists. Naruto, you'll hate them and love them, sometimes in that order. Don't lick. He held a palm up. I'm cured. I don't lick prototypes anymore. Karen snorted from where she'd braced herself in the bow's lee, ceiling slips fanned like red leaves between her fingers. You lick the air, moron. That's fine. Just keep Phoenix on a leash. Water's a jealous element. Fu hovered over the stern like a gull who'd made better life choices. Wind loved her the way dogs love anyone. She pointed at a ring of shoals to the east. They hollowed a circle and put a temple under it. The air goes wrong when I fly over. Onyx Ministry. Sakura asked. Not just, Fu said. There's a bigger no. Like somebody told the sea to hold its breath until it learned manners. Charming, Tamari said. Let's go ruin etiquette. 2 Suna skiffs peeled off to make noise, flags loud, wakes deliberate. Decoy duty. Tamari stood on the cutter's spine and slashed her fan in small, authoritative arcs. The wind put its shoulder into 2 narrow paths between reefs, waves flattened into suspicious calm. Naruto towed the device Tenten clipped to his boot, 2 razor-thin lines spooling away toward a barnacled spine of reef. The lines hummed as they bit rock. Ready, Tenten called. Naruto tested Seryu under his skin. The easy lift in his calves when air decides to keep you company. Ready, step, Tenten said. He stepped out over the water onto a taut stripe an inch wide. The sea flexed below, red and green and white. Garuda flirted along his ankles and Seryu turned the line from trap to path. He bounced, got cocky, nearly pitched into a rip current, laughed, swore, refocused. Fu swooped alongside, hands behind her head like a smug kite. You were made for stupid surfaces, she said. You say that like it's a compliment, he said. It is, she said, sincere. Hinata moved along the gunnel with the poise of someone who doesn't fall because she's already decided not to. Vector shift in 30 paces, she called. Left, then left again. They cleared the shoals into a wide ring of calmer sea. And their mouths shut. Flags dark. Floated 4 squat ministry barges. Black lacquered hulls. Tall, ugly nails bolted into deck plates and extending into the salt mist sky, storm grounders. On the central barge a wooden crane fretted at the sea with a chain, dredging up a crate smeared in seal pitch. Around the ring, island stubs held remnants of red brick towers, Uzumaki work with Th. E strength of rope and love baked into clay. They've been feeding the under ruins, Karen said softly, humming the old song wrong to make new notes. Break the orchestra, Tamari said. Tenten. Lines to towers, Tenten said. We step between barges and brick before they know which direction to aim. Fu. Spotters, Hinata added. Sakura. Protect drivers. Naruto. Be loud, he offered. Be correct, Hinata said. It should have stung. It steadied him. They moved. Tenten's line launchers thumped into red brick cornices and reef shoulders. Naruto sprinted the first line, ankles singing with Garuda's sly acceleration. Wind stepped under his foot and then let go because he'd asked and not assumed. The nearest barge lurched. A figure in lacquered apron armor waved a baton and 4 men hauled on a capstan. Swinging a chain toward Naruto's line, he cut the air with 2 fingers, Seryu making an answer out of breath. The chain dropped shy. A boom coughed and something heavy punched the water. That sound. Depth charges. But the ministry's style. Clay jars scribed with sutra, a monk's bad idea. The sea belched up a ring of foam and red silt. Naruto skimmed the top of the shock and rolled into the shelter of a broken tower. Stone warm beneath his palm. He liked it, he told it so. Temari's corridor wind squeezed the barge formation until their wakes tangled. The crane squealed. The crate resolved from sea to air. Dripping black. A barge hand reached out with a hook. Hinata's hand twitched. Now. Naruto ran. Foot. Line. Air. Line. Then bruising wood. He landed on the middle barge next to the crane, bracer humming politely. A masked monk swung a staff and the deck pushed up at Naruto as if agreeing. He let Genbu drop into his legs and took the shove without ceding ground, shoulders soft, spine stacked. He punched the staff with Byaku's 2 knuckles. The staff whined, offended, and went limp. Fu dove like a thrown spear and severed the crane's rope. The black crate plunged. Naruto. Threw Leviathan down through his toes. Pressure pocket, side angle to coax instead of resist, and the crate hit the water kindly for something full of sins. Archon. Someone bellowed from the rear barge. The sea around it puckered. He came on a hump of water like a bull shouldering into a market. Bare arms, salt scars, a necklace of shell runes that had never been asked permission and weren't planning to start. Archon Tide's mask was plain wood blackened by brine. He didn't carry a weapon. He brought pressure. The barge canted. Naruto's inner ear cried mutiny. Tide lifted his palm in the air. In Naruto's lungs thought about not being anyone's. Now, Naruto asked. Not yet, Hinata said, and the not yet settled true in his sinews. Tide twisted his wrist a fraction and the sea agreed, rings of force moving out from his hand like a patient teacher demonstrating first principles. The barge decks groaned. Men flailed against invisible currents. Tenten fired a line into a tower's mouth and dragged 2 sailors clear as a deck crate skated toward a wedge of iron and stuck there, jammed. Fu whooped, delighted by a physics fight. She swept in low, slapped the back of Naruto's head, don't die. Dummy, and lured one of Tide's pressure rings away from the line of civilians clustered near the crane rig. Karen's voice cut cool on the wind. 3 heartbeats below deck. One is small. Sakura. On it. Sakura snapped. Already dropping through the hatch like a swallowed oath. Temari's fan slashed defiance. The wind obeyed enough to nudge one of Tide's rings off a collision course with Tenten's line. Tide glanced at Tamari. He lifted 2 fingers. The water near her thickened. The fan's edge bit less. She swore in a language of Suna officers and bared her teeth, plotting. Hinata stood on the tower lip. Hair plastered to her cheek. Byakugan bright. Left flank, she called to Naruto over the sea's breath. There's a counter current under the crane. It bends back to the shoal. She sliced her hand. Let it through, then down. Naruto didn't think. He threw Garuda not up but down. A hard acceleration into the deck that made his ribs complain. Leviathan rode the angle, a spike of pressure the way a wave crest betrays the trough. He met Tide's next ring not head-on but at the exact moment Hinata's 2 fingers counted, shoved down where the ring wanted to bounce. Tide's eyes behind the plain mask widened. The ring collapsed, power leaping into the deck and out through the hull into water that had somewhere to put it. The barge lurched. Tide flung a flat palm and the backwash came snarling. Smart water, heavy, resentful. It caught Naruto across the ribs. Pain burned like rope pulled fast through a gloved hand. He stayed standing. He didn't try to be clever with Phoenix. He handed his ribs the way you hand a tired friend your pack at the top of the stairs. Flame licked his skin from the inside, heat drained his knees. He took it and paid. Breath returned, bright and expensive. Karen's voice. Dial, not yank. I know, he said, grinning because he was alive. Learning. Tide twitched again. The ring sprinted to the tower where civilians had crowded to the stairs in a panic. The red brick arch above them had cracks like old smiles. Not on people, Naruto said under his breath, to himself more than to anyone. Basilisk woke anyway, a cool coil behind the eyes. He handed it stone. He pointed it at the arch and only the arch. Microcalcification crawled like a frost in time lapse. The brick lost its argument with gravity without collapsing. The arch became a bone instead of a hazard. The villagers edged across on a bridge that hadn't existed a breath ago. Naruto's skin crawled with the wrongness of using that aspect at all. He would scrub it out of his joints later with ramen and laughter. For now he obeyed his rule and kept it off flesh. Tenten skated a line across to the rear barge and dumped a small nest of metal spiders into a coil of chain. The spiders bit. The coil locked. No more dredging, she sang, gleeful, then flung another line and hauled herself back as a clay jar detonated where she'd been, a bad thought blossoming into spray. Fu dove under the surface and popped out with a whoop and a monk's bell clamped between her teeth. They're trying so hard to shut us up, she muffled. She flung the bell. It hit a storm grounder nail and made the sound nails make when you remind them they used to be trees. The nail shuddered. Hinata's call again. He'd follow that voice anywhere. 2 steps 4, she snapped. Now down, now left. He moved. His next ring came like a whispering mule and found no ear. Naruto slapped his palm to the deck and ran a pressure line under the wood, into the water, back to the shoal Hinata had mapped, and the ring obeyed. It went to ground like lightning down a safe wire. Tide's next look wasn't annoyance. It was interest. He cocked his head. Who taught you this? The voice was ordinary, the tone not. It carried weather, rooftops. Naruto panted, because that joke kept being true in the worst places. Tide's hand closed. The air around Naruto's head thinned. He saw stars. He was a half-second from being a fainted idiot when Temari's fan took a bite out of the pressure and Hinata's palm hit the center of his back, a steadying presence more than a shove, like a bench you lean on to retie a shoe. Air resumed being a thing he could own. Thanks, he rasped. Breathe with me, Hinata said, and her voice put meter to the next 10 seconds. He did. He hated how much he needed it and loved that she said it like it wasn't a weakness. Karen, Sakura called, bursting out of the hatch with a damp toddler on her hip and a monk slung over her shoulder. Either save the other 2 or marry them to the ocean, I'm out of hands. Karen slid past Naruto in a flash of red hair and bad language. Tenten, I need a dry path to that hatch in 3 seconds or we drown like good Samaritans. Tenten planted a narrow W-frame on the deck and snapped 2 plates open. They hummed, thin slices of tuned air. Water decided to part. Sakura strode the gap like the mom of 2 particularly stupid sons. Tide gathered himself. He pushed down with both hands. The barges all sank an inch into the sea. Cracks raced in the red bricks. From the ring's far side, a crane on a different barge dragged another black crate out of water and swung it toward a stub tower that had dared to keep its spine straight. Stop the feed, Temari said, a commander now, whined giving her rank. Break the lift. I can jam the gearing, Tenten said. 3 seconds. I need 1, Naruto called, and sprinted into stupid. He ran the line launcher to the crane's boom, surging over water that wanted ankle. Seryu lent him a hand where it mattered, where line met leap. He hit the boom like an apology and then shoved Leviathan through the crane's root, pressure sideways to deflect, not crush. The crate swung wide, missed the tower by the width of a bad decision, and plunged back into red. Tenten's gadget latched the gear teeth. The crane locked and squealed like stubborn iron. 2 ministry monks came at Naruto with rods that had the solemnity of prayer. He met them with the bracer's hum and a short knee, a fight not worth making poetry out of because the important thing was not falling. Kakashi would say don't die unheroically, he muttered, breathless. No one says that, Fu said, hovering upside down beside him. But it's good advice. The ring of barges was messy now. Corridors of wind Tamari had cut through the wakes, lines firing in arcs. Civilians scrambling toward the rooted pieces of tower as Sakura scolded them into higher ground. Tide weighted his power like a man surveying a field after breaking the dam and finding new irrigation routes. He reached for the water between two barges and pulled it open like cloth. A shallow canyon formed, walls steep, current nasty. At the bottom of that cut, iron steps descending into a vault mouth. Seals gleaming deep and old. Vault, Hinata said, breath quick. They found a confluence chamber. You say that like it's good news, Tenten said. It is, Karen said through teeth. If we get there first. Naruto. With me. You fall. I make fun of you forever, Tamari told him. I don't fall, he lied, and followed Karen down a line into the water's canyon. Pressure hugged him, instant and demanding. Leviathan smoothed some of it. Genbu bolted his stance when the current tried to organize his bones. The vault doors down in the trough were a spiral, Uzumaki work. The script glowed the color of red clay in the kiln's last minute. Karen's seal threads slid through the water like eels. Don't touch the seals with chakra, she said. Touch them with the part of you that hums. It likes old things. Everything likes old things, Naruto said, and felt the hum rise obediently, Byaku's resonance licking at the edges of script without biting. The door listened to the hum. The spiral turned. Water bulleted inward and then stumbled in surprise because the chamber started drinking it instead of drowning. The pressure changed note mid-bar. Naruto swallowed hard. The room's geometry was, well, he'd already learned not to name rooms past their patience. It was an Uzumaki heart. Ropes of carved script twined around pillars into a central dais with a shallow bowl, and the bow. WL had 9 grooves like somebody had once taught a baby son to sit down. Karen's hands were steady now that she had something worth them. This is confluence, she said, and her voice respected the shape more than her words. The scaffold goes here, here, and here. She tapped 3 grooves. You use Seryu for articulation, Byaku for tuning, Genbu for load. 3 lanes. You go over that, we invite drift and I kill you myself. Love the teamwork, Naruto said, and put his palms to 3 points. The room's hum surged. For an instant he felt the 9 fireflies in his network go still, like Ki. DS being asked to stop chasing each other and listen to an elder tell a story. He breathed. Seryu slipped into his forearms. Air joints, smooth, patient. Byaku's note lifted under his fingernails and rested in his jaw. Genbu sat in his calves and spine, an honest wall. He didn't make them sing together. He made them agree to stand in the same room without trying to fix each other. The bowl glowed. Outside, water hissed and something heavy struck tower. Inside, the scaffold took his weight. For the first time since Seryu had stepped into his breath, he felt still and quick at the same time. He turned his wrist and the air did not merely yield, it translated. He set his heel and pressure ran through him and into foundation without tearing anything on the way. 3-lane stability achieved, Karen said. Wonder slipping past sarcasm. She reached up and pressed a palm to his sternum, not romantic, engineering. Do not be tempted to add a 4th. I'm printing the warning in your bones. I'm listening, he said, and he was. Everything in him tuned to the bowl's hum and to the quiet way Hinata had taught him to notice the present. A shadow fell across the door, war-shifting shape. Tide stepped into the vault. Pressure ignoring architecture in the way only men very sure of themselves manage. His mask looked wrong in here. He took one slow breath and the water in the room considered saluting. Don't, Naruto told the room. Because he was Uzumaki enough to be rude at home. Tide's eyes ticked around the script. You people built beautiful cages, he said. He sounded almost kind. Then step lightly, Karen said. I'd hate to have to clean you out of the grooves. He raised one palm. Water reared like a horse. Naruto let the 3 lanes share the load, Genbu taking the weight into the floor. Seryu slicing the crest's edge so it didn't break where it wanted, Byaku quieting the part of the surge that tried to shake hands with the seals. The wave fell around them like a curtain changing scenes. Tide looked at him properly then. Respect lived there. You learned. People were bound. Naruto said, and I was busy. But yes. Above, a scream, muffled, quickly cut off. Karen's chin jerked. Temari. Busy. Temari's word dropped down the stairwell like an irritated falcon. No more cranes. 7 fewer monks. Your boyfriend is making the sea choose manners. Karen didn't dignify that with a reply. She slapped a new seal against the bowl and hissed. This place was stolen from. A third of the scaffold is sticky with other hands. Onyx, Naruto said. And somebody else, Karen said, suddenly quiet. Something emptier. The water at Tide's heels withdrew for a startled instant, as if remembering somewhere else it needed to be. Naruto's skin tightened. Hinata's silhouette filled the doorway, eyes bright. Breath contained. She had new salt on her cheek. She moved aside without being asked. Regent Shijima descended as if coming to morning prayers. His robe wasn't wet. He looked at the bowl, the grooves. The 3 faint lamps of power pulsing under Naruto's skin, Karen's hand on script, the water's indecision around Tide. He folded his hands and bowed just enough to be mannerly and not enough to be sentimental. I asked for this, he said softly. Over and over. None of the gods answered. And Otsutsuki did. Karen didn't look up. You went shopping for a deity with a store credit. Shijima's mouth flickered. An end to collateral, he said, and it was not sales talk, it was a prayer that had become policy. No more children eaten by stories they never asked for. He promised a method. We are imperfect instruments, but we serve. You heard us say ask, right? Naruto said, not take. I'm asking now, Shijima said, and for a moment his calm fractured, grief mapped his face into new topology. Give it to us. Give it to me. Let me carry it away from the villages. You are a village, Hinata said, and the clarity in her voice was the kind that makes us ashamed of our rhetoric. You are people. You carry it to somebody. Shijima's hands trembled once. He hid it well. We built a promise, he said, stubborn and soft. He built the tool. Who? Temari barked from the stairs, voice edged. Name your god, monk. He didn't say a name. He didn't need to. The air behind him decided to be missing. Absence walked into the vault and wore a human outline like a lazy compromise. The edges of the figure smudged vision, not like a genjutsu, like a window that rejects light. Temperature didn't drop, color did. The water dog-eared itself at the margins and LKED in puddles that weren't where puddles should be. Hinata's Byakugan flared and immediately dimmed as if embarrassed at how little there was to see. Her breath clipped. He eats sight, she said, and it was almost wonder, almost fear. Izanari Otsutsuki smiled without showing anything as common as teeth. The marks at the edge of that knot face wrinkled like the idea of a smile had been painted on air. Hello, he said, as if meeting the new acolytes at a temple. His voice wasn't cold, it was clean. Naruto Uzumaki, your house still leaks. Naruto's hands didn't sweat, they dried. Basilisk lifted its head and then lay back down. Because whatever this absence was, that aspect had the sense to keep quiet. Seryu stilled. Byako went very quiet. Genbu's line from heel to crown held. Tide bowed his head. The water tried to kneel. Shijima closed his eyes, grief set into reverence. Herald, he said, and his voice had the humility of a man who'd once been told a kindness he needed. Regent, Izanari said, approving. You've tuned them well. He stepped toward the bowl and the spiral script dimmed. The grooves rejected light like oil. Karen's hand came off Naruto's sternum. She moved to S, tanned between the Otsutsuki and the bowl as if blocking a door in a bad neighborhood. She had one seal in hand and one in teeth and she looked like an Uzumaki priestess for a breath, angry at God. Don't, she said. Izanari tilted his head. The knot light bled out of the corners. I'll take only what's wasteful, he said, gentle. And return the world to human scale. You return nothing, Temari snarled from the stair. Wind tried to enter and turned around, offended at not being a participant. Hinata's fingers found Naruto's wrist. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. Her pulse was steady under damp skin. Her voice reached only him. Don't add lanes, she breathed. Keep 3. Keep me. He nodded once, tiny. Izanari's attention settled like ash. He spread an empty hand and anti-chakra null fields shimmered, an absence net. Bells wouldn't matter here. Songs would be eaten. Naruto felt Baku curl into a small, blunt refusal. He kept Seryu at his fingers, Byako under tongue, Genbu in heel. 3 lanes. He could do this. Shijima watched all of them like a man at a hanging who still hasn't chosen which side of the rope to stand on. Tide lifted both palms, waiting for a signal. Karen's seal smoked. Tenten's line stuttered against not air. Fu hovered in the stairwell, grin gone, eyes bright and very awake. Bring me your waist, Izanari said kindly. I will make the sky empty again. Naruto set his heel to the bowl and stopped being a boy who wanted to be safe. He was a house with 9 rooms. 3 were lit. He let them be enough. Try, he said. The vault sang. Low, old, ARO. Pay tightened across generations, and the red spiral sea outside answered with thunder that didn't arrive as sound so much as decision. The ministry's nails on the barges bent a few considerate degrees, like men taking hats off in a storm. Izanari moved without moving. The dim reached for Naruto's lanes. He held. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Crown of the 9. Lightning stitched the cloud shelf so often the sky looked crosshatched. The empty sky citadel floated above the thunder sea like a broken temple pretending to be a crown. Pagoda roofs taken from a dozen countries sat at wrong angles, prayer bells hung sideways. A bridge ended in air and started again 5 spans later because someone had told geometry to mind its place. Where the citadel met the storm, the rain flattened and slid off like oil. Naruto stood in the cutter's prow and felt 9 quiet rooms in him take inventory. Seryu breathed along his forearms, ready to cut air into steps. Genbu sat in his calves with the patience of a wall. Byako listened against his teeth, waiting to tune. The others waited as they should. Basilisk curled cool at the edge of vision. Leviathan leaned an ear to pressure. Garuda hummed in ankle bones like a coin you flip absent-mindedly. Phoenix watched his breath. Baku blinked once and went still, polite as a cat. Hinata's fingers traced a route from sea to sky. 3 gates, none of them doors, she said, eyes bright with Byakugan. There. The wind's been told where to stop. We'll make it forget. Tamari grinned like a woman about to bully weather. Outer air is mine, she said. Fu, spotter, decoy, chaos gremlin. Fu said cheerfully, and threw herself up into the storm as if the sky were a trampoline. Tenten clicked open the case at her feet. Sound mirrors, she said, handing out plates etched with comb teeth. Stick them at corners. When they hum, they give you your voice back. When they scream, don't be there. Karen, seal jammer. Karen shoved a scroll between her teeth to free both hands. I'll jam what can be jammed and overclock what needs it, she said around parchment. And if anyone tries Phoenix without permission, I will cry, and it will be very awkward for everyone. Sakura tightened her headband. Civilians. Hinata's gaze tracked the ring of mismatched buildings. There are people on the lower platforms, she said. Not bound, exactly. Arranged. Like tools you might want later. Naruto felt his jaw go tight. Tools. He hated that word more than enemy, some days. Call it, Tamari said. Make it a concert. Hinata rolled her shoulders, set the rhythm of her breath. And the storm seemed to take a step closer to hear. Fu, peel the watchers from the east ramparts. Tamari, carve 2 wind tunnels at 40 and 60 degrees off the main axis, wide enough for a person. Too narrow for a formation. Tenten, mirrors along every 3rd archway. Sakura, with the evac teams. Karen with Naruto. We'll go through the places that don't admit to being places. You're terrifying, Tamari said. And it was admiration. Hinata's mouth tipped. I'm organized. They went. Tamari opened the sky like an expert host holding 2 doors at once. Wind narrowed into tunnels that hummed with permission. Fu rode one up, spun out of it into nothing, and whistled. 3 lookouts chased the sound since chasing joy is a habit some people never outgrow. Tenten planted mirrors with quick slaps. 1, 2, 3, plates that looked like decorative shields until they sang a note that made your throat remember it had a job. Sakura led 2 Suna shinobi across a hanging lattice toward the lower platforms. Her voice brisk and kind. Karen tucked a strip of paper under Naruto's collarbone and smacked it flat. That's for when you think you're invincible, she said. It won't stop you. It will make you remember my face at inconvenient moments. Romantic, Naruto said. Cheap, she said. Let's move. The first gate wasn't a door so much as a story the wind was telling itself about not letting people in. Hinata cut a small rectangle out of that story with 2 fingers and they stepped through onto stone that had once been a temple floor and now decided it was a skybridge. Below, thunder stitched again. The citadel's bells hung silent. Their silence felt smug. Tenten angled a mirror toward the bells and gave them back their own hum. The silence turned from smug to sulky, then to useful, a tone that made the next footfall clearer to their ears, the next command carry farther. Good bells, Tenten said kindly, as if praising dogs. Karen flicked a slip across the arch and frowned. Seal mesh woven through the walkway, she said. It's not genjutsu, it's an etiquette lesson. If you walk with dignity, it lets you be. If you run like a boy late to class. I never ran like that, Naruto lied. It will try to teach your bones manners, Karen finished. Naruto goes first. Hinata squeezed his wrist once, a pulse of trust. He stepped. He didn't sneak. He didn't swagger. He let Genbu settle into his heels and the floor liked him for it. When he reached the far end, he turned and offered his hand. Hinata took it. Temari didn't. She didn't need it. She moved. With the sort of dignity that floors recognize. Tenten deliberately stepped too fast. The mesh roused. The mirror at her hips sang. The mesh decided to mind its business. They reached a courtyard built from 4 different holy places. Lanterns from Taki hung under a painted hall roof from the land of iron. A slab from an Uzumaki memorial had been turned into a bench. Naruto wanted to apologize to the stones and also wanted to break something on their behalf. On the far side, a wide stair rose toward the citadel's heart where a ring of prayer wheels turned without hands. Figures waited. Masks plain, robes salted white. Some carried bells. Some held iron wedges. Some had nothing but their weight and the training that lets a body be enough. Shijima stood among them, not armored. He looked Lee K, a man who had read the same line many times and only now noticed the word he had missed. Archon Glass stood at his right, bare-faced, expression cool and interested, a cut on her cheekbone that the wind had not dared heal without permission. Regent, Naruto said. Uzumaki, Shijima replied, and there was something like apology in the way he said the name, and something like longing he didn't try to hide. He glanced at Hinata, Temari, Tenten, Karen, Fu, Sakura moving on the lower tier. You brought an orchestra. We were invited to the concert, Temari said. Stay, Shijima said, and the word was gentle, ridiculous. Almost a prayer. Naruto looked past him to the prayer wheels turning. The axles didn't pierce them. The wheels turned on absence. You built a lovely place to be eaten, he said. Shijima's mouth tightened. We mean to starve it. Then help us cut the throat, Karen snapped, because sarcasm stands in for mercy when you need it to. Before Shijima could answer, the air thinned. Not colder, not darker, emptier. Izanari drifted down the stairs as if the idea of stairs bored him. The shape of him bent the edges of sight, color desaturated a shade near his outline. His attention brushed them politely, briefly. Like a good host counting guests. Welcome, he said. You saved me gathering. Naruto didn't take his eyes off him. We brought our own bowls. Greedy, Izanari said without heat. The anti-chakra shimmered out from his lifted hand like a net of holes. One bell bearer raised his tool as if to help. Izanari didn't look at the man. The bell went quiet and stayed that way, sulking. Izanari smiled a little. We're past noises. I like noises, Naruto said, but he felt the lanes he had laid in the red spiral sea hesitate. Seryu slid. Byako flickered. Genbu held. But the field wanted to call his power waste and suck it into the nothing. 3 lanes, Hinata said under her breath, the words a hinge. Keep the scaffold. I'll hold edges. He set heel, finger, tongue. Seryu breathed. Byako listened. Genbu bore. Izanari's head tilted. Not quite enough, but more than I expected, he said, and he raised the other hand. Behind him something the shape of a serpent poured out from between 2 prayer wheels. It wasn't a thing. It was the outline of the absence of a thing. Ribs made of gaps, scales implied by where color went missing, eyes suggested by how the air around them refused to commit. It slid along the stairs with an elegance that had nothing to do with being alive. Void serpent, Temari murmured. I'm going to hit it. Hit the place it is, Hinata corrected. Not the part that pretends to be shape. Temeri's fan snapped a crosscut into the air. The serpent's neck took the edge where a normal throat would and then didn't. The cut made no sense. Wind peeled off into a curtain and fell away. Tenten's mirror caught the torn movement and sang it back. For one beat the serpent's left flank rippled where none had been. Naruto saw a place to aim. He didn't throw anything. He moved. Garuda bit his ankles and he was there, a handwidth from absence. Leviathan pressed a pocket into the air to give his palm something to push on. He hummed Byako into the bracer, not loud. Focused. And pressed the hum into that ripple. The serpent convulsed. The absence shied. Interesting, Izanari said. A boy who knows where to put his breath. Man, Naruto said, because pettiness can be a weapon. The first wave of ministry adherents moved, not suicidally, not bravely, dutifully. They tried to box Hinata. Fu hit their corner-like laughter with elbows, tapping masks. Darting fingers flicking seal strings aside. Sakura cut in at the second line with a medic's precision. One strike to the nerve, one to the knee, supporting the fall so no skull hit stone. Lay them down, she called to the Suna shinobi behind her. You can cuff remorse later. Shijima didn't move. His hands were together. His mouth was a line. His eyes watched Naruto the way a father watches a choice he knows he cannot own. Izanari flicked his fingers and the prayer wheels spun faster. The citadel's stolen floors shuddered. Sound tried to leave the room. Tenten planted a mirror in the arch, angled it hard, and fed their voices into a side corridor where bells were still humble enough to echo them back. No eating my sentences, she told the air, and the air, confused by confidence, obeyed. Left tower, Hinata called. Pressure not. Break it and the outer net loosens. On it, Tamari said, and sent a wind spear in a curve. It turned around a pillar as if the pillar were politely making way. Knifed into the tower angle, and the knot unwove. Outside, the storm remembered its habits. Rain came in crooked and honest. Lightning sniffed the nails and thought rude thoughts about them. Izanari's head tipped again. You don't like my gift, he said. You call this gift to people who never asked, Naruto said. That's theft in a nice bowl. A bowl is a bowl, Izanari said mildly. It holds. Your kind spills. You don't know my kind, Naruto said, and then he didn't explain. He moved. He danced his 3 lanes the way Hinata had set the pulse. Seryu to carve a step where there wasn't. Genbu to take the counterweight when the serpent's suggestion of a tail swiped. Byako to tune a mirror note into a slice that made absence admit it was sitting on something. Karen threaded a seal through his shoulder blades and he could feel the framework strengthen. Confluence scaffold bright, drift held at bay. The serpent mouthed the air around his ribs and taste left his tongue. Baku stirred, offended. It hates rude dreams, it hates liar hungers more. Naruto let Baku open its blunt maw and swallow the little knot voices that came with the serpent's lunge. You will be less if you give up shape. The knot voices dissolved in a polite shiver. The serpent flinched, as if for the first time it felt something like fear filtered back through its host. Ah, Izanari said, you have a tiny truth eater. How quaint. Hungry, Naruto said, and well behaved. Teach it to starve, Izanari said. It will save you. Teaching it table manners, Naruto said, and then Temeri's fan cracked the air above his head. He ducked as a ring of null wash swept across the stair like a mop. Tenten's mirror screamed. The plate split. She grinned like a proud parent anyway, died doing her job. My girl, and flung a second mirror into place with an underhand toss. Down on the lower platforms, Sakura's evac teams moved like a migrating flock, scattered enough to be hard to net, focused enough to stay found. Civilians with the posture of tools became people when she put a hand on an elbow and said, with me. Fu lugged 3 at a time in a sling of air she shaped out of mischief. I am very trustworthy, she announced to a man clinging to her neck. Please scream in a forward direction. Karen's seal work changed rhythm. They're trying to take your stabilized lanes apart, she said at Naruto's ear. They're poking holes where Byako hums. Do not fight holes with more song. Use Genbu and Leviathan. Weight and pressure, not music. He obeyed, because he'd learned the expensive that genius is just listening quickly. He shoved pressure into the gaps, not furious, stubborn, he set weight on the floor where the net wanted to lift. The holes closed, irritated. Izanari's brows faintly arched, and that small concession felt like winning a poem contest. Regent, Izanari said without looking away. Collect. Shijima's hands clenched. He didn't give the order. Half his monks moved anyway. Habit heavier than thought. They reached toward the grooves in the floor where Naruto's confluence scaffold shone like a tide pool. Temari's fan knocked one aside. Hinata's palm struck the wrist of another and she said, very softly, you don't want to touch that. The man flinched as if the polite truth had teeth. He stopped. His bell dangled stupidly. Naruto could feel basilisk press against his eyes, curious. Wanting to claim. He swallowed the urge and looked up instead. Lightning licked a nail and recoiled like it had burned itself. Hinata, he said low. Can I? Yes, she said. Anchor to the broken tower. Temari, give him a storm spine. Finally, Temari said, and the joy in her voice was a new weather pattern. Naruto flung a hand up. Kirin jumped down into his bones like a dog off a porch. He didn't throw it at Izanari. He threw it through a path Hinata had traced. Down the temple's stolen ridge beam, along the nail's new bend, into a copper run Tenten had hammered. Into a crack 6 breaths ago because she had seen it coming. The strike ran clean. No splatter, no burn, then split on the mirror edge and came down in 3 thin spears into the serpent's suggested joints. The serpent didn't scream. The air around it rippled like oil hit with rain. Izanari took a polite step back. Some of you will live longer if you put your weapons down, Naruto called, not pleading, not preaching. He didn't look at Shijima. He looked at the men and women who had been told a purpose and given a bell. I'll have more jokes for you if you switch sides. I'm very funny. A handful of masks tilted, suspecting they might like jokes. An older monk with wrists scarred from rope lowered his wedge and stared at his hand like it might be the only thing he owns. He placed the wedge on the ground with unnecessary care, as if setting a cup at a shrine. Another followed. Not most. Some. Shijima's face cracked. Not much. Enough to be called human. He lifted his chin and said to his own people, only. Stand down if you choose it. I will not call you back. The words took him apart and reassembled him smaller and truer. Regent, Izanari said, mild and warning. I asked, Shijima said. And it broke him all the way through to say it right. Izanari didn't sigh. He made a movement like changing pages. The null field tightened. Naruto felt his 3 lanes buckle at the spine, not at the edges. Basilisk pressed harder at his sight. Phoenix teased breath. Too many songs. He remembered Karen's seal at his sternum and the way her hand had been an engineering solution. He remembered Hinata's, keep me. He kept 3. He let the rest wait. He refused drift. The serpent coiled to strike all of them together. Tenten, Naruto said, and didn't finish the sentence. Tenten was already moving. She slid a tube along the floor and thumbed a catch. Folded plates popped open, snapping into a long, narrow channel like a gutter. She drove a spike at one end, flicked a switch, and the plates hummed, not loud, permissive. An invitation for things that didn't want to have a place to suddenly have one. Bind to this, she told the world. Not to him. Garbage chute. Temari guessed. Crown conduit, Tenten said. Don't spit in it. Naruto stepped into the serpent's lunge with Seryu in his knees and waist, humming Byako at precisely the seam that had rippled under Tenten's first mirror cut. Leviathan set pressure where the lunge needed emptiness. Genbu made heel into hinge. He took the strike. Didn't dodge, didn't meet it head on, turned its need into motion and poured it down the channel Tenten had opened. Absence slid into a place it did not own and caught. The plates sang, not pretty. The song was the sound a jar makes when you fit the lid with an ugly twist after sugar gets on the threads. The serpent writhed. Its tail smudged 3 prayer wheels into gray that was somehow less than dust. Izanari finally frowned, the smallest movement like shade shifting. He spread bow. Hands and the knot light tried to peel everything Naruto had gathered. The confluence scaffold flared once and Karen hissed. You have 3 minutes at this overclock before your soup, she said. And he loved her for telling him the unadorned math. That's a lot of time, Naruto said, because optimism, while stupid, is portable. Hinata's voice threaded the chaos, precise, Temari's wind tuned to it like brass to a violin. Fu cut from above, taunting gravity into chasing her. Sakura's orders kept people from being lost like pennies. Karen fed the confluence until the paper at her wrist smoked. Tenten braced the conduit with her whole body, shoulder jammed under the plate's lip, teeth bared. Naruto, she grunted. Finish the jar. How? He asked honestly. Ask it to be closed, Hinata said, steady. And mean it. He meant it. He set his palm on the conduit's rim and pushed Basilisk into stone, not into skin, not into creatures. He calcified the mouth's edges to give emptiness something to grip. Tenten's plates thrummed as if relieved to have a job with parameters. He fed Kirin in a whisper. Not lightning to burn, lightning to solder joints, thin threads that melted the seam's toge. There without splashing fire into anyone's chest. Phoenix stayed out of it because he asked politely and because he promised to feed it later. Baku ate the fear that bubbled up, not from Izanari, who didn't seem to believe in fear. But from the serpent, which wasn't allowed the luxury. He ate that fear before it could find a mouth. The conduit locked. The serpent jerked in a last, contemptuous rip. ND tore a strip out of the air that would take 3 days to feel normal again. It poured into the channel and stuck there, writhing like smoke in a bottle. Izanari watched it with academic interest. You built a drain, he observed. Clever child. Team project, Naruto said, breath shredded, knees shaking, grin stupid. We get grades together. Then let me grade you, Izanari said, and he was simply there, in front of Naruto. Not a step taken. His hand came up, open, and Naruto felt the lanes peel anyway, not from the field this time, but from the idea that he didn't deserve to keep them. It's a hard idea to fight because it wears all your kindest faces. He staggered. Hinata put her palm on his ribs and her breath against his shoulder. Breathe with me, she said. I am here. He obeyed. The idea lost one tooth. Temuri's wind shouldered in like a bouncer. The idea lost 2 more. Karen's seal burned cold through his sternum and the idea hit a wall with a good thunk and sat down. 10's conduit thrummed under his palm like a heartbeat. Fu laughed above him and dropped a bell on Izanari's shoulder just to see what sound not light would make. None. Still, it felt good. Shijima moved then. Not to strike. To stand between Izanari and the nearest of his people who had not laid down their tools. He didn't grandstand. He simply reallocated his body to a better place. Herald, he said, softly. Enough. Regent, Izanari said, like a man seeing a chair claim the room, perplexed, not yet concerned. Don't confuse mercy with arithmetic. Don't confuse quiet with consent, Shijima said. And he stepped aside not for Izanari, not for Naruto, but for the men and women behind him to see a path that didn't require bells. A third of the masks hit the floor in a rattle like rain on tile. Something in the Citadel's foundation chose sides. The prayer wheels wobbled and a few simply slid to a stop because they were made to be turned by hands. The nails along the edges bent the saint of the way under a bolt Tamari called and Hinata grounded. The storm poured inside and the air stopped behaving like someone's polite guest and went back to being itself. Tenten's mirrors sang with the mess, happy as windows in spring. Izanari looked at Naruto again and this time there was something like attention. All 9 are yours, he said, not a question. Take them. Wear them as a single tail. It will be easier for the world when your story is one thing. No, Naruto said, clear as cold water. They get to be themselves and together. Wasteful, Izanari said. Leaky. Human, Naruto said. Worth it. He took one breath and let all 9 touch. Not to blend, not to dissolve, to agree. Seryu outlined the motion. Suzaku warmed the blood without burning. The flare stayed in his bones, not his skin. Byako tuned each thread to the others until their edges stopped grinding. Genbu bore the load. Kirin flicked a precise readiness through the upper arms like a tool laid within reach. Garuda lived at the edges of stance, ready to make any step a choice. Leviathan kept pressure honest so nothing got greedy. Basilisk slid around the architecture to keep the conduit's mouth a frame, not a trap for anyone's flesh. Baku patted at his heels like a dog that likes everybody and still gets to choose. The 9 didn't sing a chorus. They breathed the same air. Izanari reached to unmake and found no purchase. Now, Hinata said, and the word was a hinge that opened the room. Naruto moved. He didn't leap. He arrived. Seryu and Garuda carrying him cleanly into the space where Izanari had leaned. Leviathan pushing pressure into the knot body to show where it must be to be seen. Byako set the hum in the bracer to a note that made absence feel its outline. Kirin sparked across the con. Do its rim and soldered the jar shut as the serpent made one last hateful lunge. Basilisk calcified a strut above to keep a roof beam from opportunistically falling on Sakura and 3 civilians. Foe. Nyx kept his lungs full and his ribs strong without eating. Genbu put his heel through the thought that he should not own this moment. Baku swallowed the leftover fear that Izanari didn't acknowledge but carried like a cold draft anyway. Bind, Naruto said to the air, to the jar, to the storm, to the world that had made room for all this, and Tenten's plates took the command and turned obedience into engineering. The conduit glowed hot and plasma clean and then cooled to the temperature of relief. Izanari stepped back and the knot light rippled, then it smoothed and acted as if he hadn't moved at all. Not bad, he said. For a leaky vessel. Naruto laughed, breathless, savage with joy, because it wasn't bravado, it was the relief of a lock clicking. I like leaks, he said. Keeps the house aired. The citadel groaned, a sound of age deciding to be honest. The nails bent flat. The prayer wheels stopped on their own, embarrassed. The lower platforms emptied of people as Sakura's teams are. Each the last ladders and coaxed the last stubborn pair of feet to climb. Temari's fan eased to a steady slow. She reined a whole gale with a flick and let it down like a well-trained horse. Karen actually sat on the rim of the conduit, sweat streaking dust into salt lines on her face, and allowed herself one grin that said she had gotten away with something difficult and righteous. Fu Lei en her back in midair and kicked her feet because being alive is a hobby she intended to keep. Izanari looked around at a house that had refused to be the room he'd rented and tilted his head, as if considering whether to complain to management. This was always a small annex, he said. I will go back to the river and take water there. Try asking there, Naruto said. See how it goes. Politeness is an instrument, Izanari said. So is saying no, Hinata said, quiet and incandescent. He considered her a long beat. You will need to cut many things to keep this balance, he said. Including some of your own. Maybe, Naruto said. We'll pick what? We'll do it awake. Izanari's mouth curved in that nod smile truly, for the first time. Wasteful, he repeated, almost affectionate. The smudge of knot light contracted, then thinned, then spilled down through the gap between 2 stolen rooftops like a sheet poured neatly from a bowl. He did not slam a door. He did not swear revenge. He left as if bored. The storm went about its business, which is rain, which is cleaning. Shijima stood in the middle of what he had made. He looked older in the honest way that means the body has finally caught up to the heart. He turned his hands over and watched them like they were animals he'd only just realized needed care. I am going to spend the rest of my life laying floors, he said, voice too tired to be dramatic. Good, Tamari said. We need floors. Start with this one, Tenten said, tapping the conduit with her heel. I'm not leaving this jar sitting in the open like a smug wine cask. We stow it under 3 kinds of lock and a 4th that's just mean. Karen staggered up and stuck a seal over Tenten's shoulder. Here, she said. Mean it is. She turned to Shijima. You're going to help me dismantle your nets and build confluence protocols. You know the Onyx routes. I know how not to kill anyone trying to be helpful. Shijima bowed to her. Small, sincere. Yes. Don't make a religion out of this. Naruto said to him, but without heat. Make a schedule. Shijima laughed, a short, broken thing that healed by the second breath. I can do that. They moved through the citade. Doing what you do when you end a war in a house. Checking rooms for people and small quiet flames, setting bells upright and asking them to be bells, not cages. Sakura patched and ordered. Hinata's quiet instructions carried like lines painted on floors. Tamari took down banners that had never earned their colors and rolled them neatly because you can be angry and still respect cloth. Fu found a hall of prayer flags in a trunk and liberated them into the wind until the sky looked like someone had let children decorate. Tenten took notes at speed and drew a terrible map that would be beautiful tomorrow. Karen and Shijima argued over seal syntax like cousins. Naruto set his palm to one roof beam that had been stolen from an Uzumaki gate and told it, you can go home when you're ready. He didn't know if promise works on wood. He tried anyway. Dawn didn't exactly come. The storm got embarrassed and backed off a little, and the horizon pinked. The sea stopped trying to eat itself. The citadel didn't fall. It chose to stand as a reference point for all the boats who would tell stories about this night and then argue about the best details. On the western parapet, Hinata sat with her feet through the railing, hair damp. Eyes tired in a way that meant full. Naruto joined her and closed his mouth for the first time in an hour. They watched Fu convince two gulls to race her. They listened. Tamari threatened to unionize the wind. They watched Tenten rig a rope cradle for the conduit with the affectionate profanity of a mechanic keeping a temperamental engine purring. They heard Karen tell Shijima, gently and without pity, to get some water before he did anything else. Naruto said, "Finally, I wanted to call it one thing. The power. It would be easier." Hinata turned her face toward him. Close enough that he could see a scatter of freckles he hadn't catalogued yet. "Easier isn't kinder," she said. He nodded. "Feels leaky." She smiled. "Small and good. We're not jars." He laughed, surprised by the relief in it. "Tenten will be offended. She'll build better jars," Hinata said. "You'll be you." He looked out over the thunder sea and let the 9 rooms in him leave their doors open. Not to bleed, to breathe. Below, on a lower platform, Shijima gathered the men and women who had set down their wedges and bells. He didn't sermon. He made a list. The first 3 items were sweeping floors, boiling water, and writing down the names of anyone who wanted to leave without being followed. The 4th was visiting families to say true things about what had been done and what would be undone. The 5th was to assist Karen with the dismantling of nets in the Red Spiral Sea and elsewhere. The 6th was to apologize to the bells. Archon Glass walked to the parapet and stood, a careful distance from Naruto and Hinata, hands at her sides. She had a new bruise along her jaw in the shape of a bad thought. "You aimed at mirrors instead of faces," she said to Naruto, not a question. "Mostly," he said. "I let Basilisk touch stone." "I saw," she said. "We will argue later." "I like later," he said. She looked down at Shijima, at the men and women pulling seal lines up like old nets. "He will not punish those who lay down arms," she said, the faintest thread of skepticism in it, because hope is a skill you relearn. "He has a list," Hinata said, and Glass's mouth softened at that. Fu swooped low enough to rattle their ankles and then shot up laughing. "Breakfast," she announced to no one in particular and everyone at once. "I'm going to eat noodles until I achieve a second gravity. Ramen later," Naruto said in reflex, and it felt like a vow to something he trusted more than victory. They took the long walk down to the level where the skiffs would tie up. Tenten and D2 Suna engineers nursed the conduit into a cradle that could be lashed and hauled without coming undone. Tamari spoke to captains about storm lanes and how not to die in them. Karen started the beginnings of a workshop in an annex room with good light, buckets, and an air of useful work. She made Shijima haul water twice before she let him touch ink. Naruto lingered at the edge of the platform. The wind nudged his shoulder. Friendly. He put his hand out and felt it step into his palm like a bird onto a windowsill. "Rules," he said, "because habits feel like home." Hinata stepped beside him, their elbows almost touching. "New ones?" she asked. "Same as the first," he said. "Don't point what can't be undone at a person's face." He let the wind go. "And keep it a house, not a throne." She nodded. "Once. Then we should make doors that other people can open." "We will," he said. "Protocols, right, lessons, not secrets." From below, Sakura shouted up, "If you two are done being inspirational. I have 3 bruised monks who need to be told to drink water slowly." "Coming," Naruto called, and Hinata slid a warm look at him that made the climb down feel like the safest thing. They left he citadel not like victors leaving a trophy, but like owners leaving a place that needed workpeople and lists. The storm peeled away with a grudging respect. The nails lay flat, ugly and harmless now, waiting to be melted down into something honest like roof hooks. The prayer wheels stood still, waiting for hands. On the cutter, Tenten leaned back against the mast and flicked the edge of her mirror with a fingernail. It sang a note that suited morning. Fu slumped on a coil of rope with a noodle bowl and announced between mouthfuls, "I have chosen you as my people." Tamari stared at the horizon like a general and a woman at once. Both tired and excited about the stupid amount of paperwork wind can make. Karen fell asleep sitting up with a seal across her face like a bad bandage. Sakura counted heads and liked the number, then glared at anyone who looked like they might mess up the number by doing something heroic before lunch. Naruto took the seat beside Hinata, their shoulders not touching, and let the sea carry him toward whatever counted as home today. He didn't feel like a god. He didn't feel like a boy. He felt like someone who could breathe in a bigger room and invite people in without losing the shape of himself. The 9 rooms in him left their doors open and didn't argue. Ramen, Hinata said, as if reading his mind. Ramen, he said, as if saying it could bless a future. They'd make the protocols. They'd build the doors. They'd sweep floors and boil water and apologize to bells. They'd hunt the last nets and unstring them. They'd argue later, and cut where they must, and laugh in stupid places, and keep one another from drift. Not peace. Momentum. He could live with that. Chapter 5 End.